Chapter 636. Why aren't they moving? In the forest hundreds of feet behind them, someone whispered in a low voice. Ever since these foreign merchants left Golden Jade Pavilion, they were ordered to follow behind them. Foreigners were foreigners after all. They did not have the slightest vigilance. Carrying treasures worth hundreds of thousands of taels of silver, they swaggered on the road. All the way out of the city, the roads they took became more and more remote. They were simply thinking about the people following behind them. In the wilderness, there was no place more suitable for killing people, robbing treasures, and destroying corpses. Once they walked a bit further and reached an even more desolate place, they would be able to make their move. Suddenly someone whispered, "Why aren't they moving?" They put the things down. "Not good, they seem to have found us." The leader was also stunned when he heard the words, but then he slapped a man's head and said, "What are you panicking about? There are only 5 of them. Even if they find us, what can they do? Let's do it." 20 silhouettes dashed out of the forest and headed in the direction of the 5 people. One of the men carefully put aside the bag he was carrying and said, "Brothers, you take a break and leave these people to me." A man next to him gritted his teeth and said, "Don't do this. Second brother has just broken into the heaven list. Everyone treats me as a soft persimmon. I have been challenged 18 times in 3 days. It's really hard to calm down if I don't vent my anger." On the opposite side, the 20 people who took out black cloth to cover their faces were surprised to find that the 5 people not only didn't escape, but even 2 of them directly faced them. "Kill!" The leader whispered and unsheathed his long saber. After a quarter of an hour, the 20 people had bruised noses and swollen faces. Their clothes were taken off, leaving only a crotch cloth. They were tied to the tree with their hands behind their backs. Their faces were extremely pale, and their expressions were of horror and despair. Spare my life." They watched as the foreigners tore off their loincloths. They seemed to have thought of something, and their foreheads were drenched in sweat. "You don't talk about morality." One of the foreign men looked at them and stammered a few words. He patted the long saber in his hand, which made everyone's heart tremble. "Big brother, why didn't you just kill them just now?" A slightly younger man quickly stepped forward from the forest and asked. The man shook his head and said, 20 lives, the government will definitely investigate to the end. If they find something, won't it cause trouble for the Alliance Master? Don't worry, after losing so much face, these people definitely won't make too much noise." They got lucky. The conversation died down, and the footsteps gradually faded away. After an unknown period of time, a voice came from another part of the forest. 2 figures walked into the forest. One could vaguely see that they were a man and a woman. "Sanlang, don't worry." There seemed to be the sound of clothes being taken off, followed by the woman's somewhat worried voice. "Sanlang, won't others see us here?" "I won't." The man's breathing was a little heavy. All right then," the woman said softly, and the rustling sound began to grow louder. "Can the 2 of you wait for a moment?" Suddenly, a voice came from behind them. The woman's face instantly turned pale. She turned her head to take a look, and in the next moment, a scream could be heard. You don't run away. Come back. Please help us. We will repay you in the future." 20 servants of the Chui family were stripped naked and tied up in the forest outside the city. They were found by a woodcutter overnight? Li Yi rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked at the second young lady and asked, "Are the people you arranged reliable?" Mississippi Lu waved a hand, and the servants of the Li family carried a few large boxes into the room and left respectfully. She waved a hand, and the lid of one of the boxes opened automatically. There were all kinds of pearls, gems, and jade inside, and the whole room was lit up. "All right, let's do it." Li Yi slammed the table and said, "In the meeting room of the Lu League. Do you all remember your targets?" Lu Luo sat at the head of the table and said in a low voice, "Yes, Chuzhou City, Golden Jade Pavilion. Qing'an City, Golden Jade Pavilion. Qingzhou City, Golden Jade Pavilion." Not long after that, a dozen people walked out of the meeting room. Carriages drove out of the hall, and each carriage was followed by a dozen people. The carriages traveled in different directions and disappeared on the official road. Over the past 2 days, from the nobles to the ordinary people, the topic of discussion was still glass. The brothels always followed the trend of the masses, and the stories told in the brothels also kept up with the times. In the past few days, there were a few legends about glass. For example, in the Journey to the West, Monk Sha used to be the curtain-lifting general in the Heavenly Court, but he was banished from the Heavenly Court because he broke a glass lamp belonging to the Queen Mother of the West. Even in the Heavenly Palace, glass was very precious. Another example was that if you collected 7 glass balls of different colors, you could summon a dragon. Another legend was that glass was the leftover stone that Niuwa used to patch up the sky. It was said in the Buddhist scriptures that the medicine guru Buddha made a vow when he was practicing the Bodhisattva path. He wished that his body would be as clear and pure as glass, and that he would use the power of the fire net to purify the suffering of all living beings. Of course, the nobles rarely went to the brothels to listen to such stories. What they cared about was the Wang family's glass bazaar tomorrow. In the main residence of the Chui family in Jing City, 20 people knelt on the ground with their heads lowered, and their faces were pale. The man with the surname Chui yelled, "20 of you can't beat 5 of them?" The leader of the group didn't dare to say that the other party had only sent 2 people, so he lowered his head and said, "Second Lord, we didn't know that those foreign merchants were all powerful martial artists." The man with the surname Chui's face was dark. If the glass balls weren't real, they wouldn't have lost anything. "We've underestimated those foreign merchants." He looked at the group of people kneeling on the ground and said coldly, "Go and receive your punishment." In a manor outside the capital, 2 men in purple stood at the front, and behind them were 10 men in blue and yellow. They all knelt on the ground and said loudly, "Welcome, Your Highness." The middle-aged Taoist nun slowly floated down from the sky and walked into the yard. A man in purple tore off the red cloth covering something in the yard, pointed to a towering white jade statue below, and said, "Your Highness, this was carved by a skilled stonemason under my command. It took me 3 months to carve it. It will definitely." The middle-aged Taoist nun glanced at him and asked, "I heard that many temples in the capital have glass Buddha statues?" The man in purple was stunned and said, "Your Highness, it is true. I've also thought that if I can also make a glass statue for Your Highness, I'm afraid it will attract countless believers. But except for the glass Guanyin statue that the Cold Mountain Temple got from foreign merchants, and the glass statue that the County Count of Chong'an gave to the eldest princess, the others are all from the Imperial Palace, and we can't get in touch with them. I've also sent people to find foreign merchants, but so far they have found nothing. However, the Wang family of Luochuan is holding a glass bazaar in Hibiscus Garden tomorrow, and we will also participate. We will definitely find enough glass to make a statue for Your Highness." "The County Count of Chong'an?" The Taoist nun frowned. "Yes, the County Count of Chong'an, Li Yi." The man in purple nodded and said. Chapter 637. "There's no need for you to participate in tomorrow's glass bazaar," the nun said after a moment's thought. "Lady, why?" The purple-clothed man paused. Just as he was about to ask for more details, the nun waved him off. "The situation in the Qi Kingdom has changed. The blue-clothed and purple-clothed emissaries will leave the capital with me. One blue-clothed emissary will stay behind to contact the believers in the capital. Time is of the essence, so make your preparations. We'll depart at noon tomorrow at the latest," the nun said calmly as she looked into the distance. "Yes, lady." The purple-clothed man cupped his hands and bowed. "I'll make the arrangements immediately." After slowly retreating from the courtyard, he walked up to the crowd still kneeling outside. "Su Zheng." A blue-clothed man immediately stood up. "What are your orders, purple-clothed emissaries?" The purple-clothed man said in a low voice, "The lady has ordered that the emissaries of the holy religion and above must leave the capital tomorrow. However, we cannot abandon the believers in the capital. Among the emissaries, you are the most familiar with the capital. You will stay behind to contact and develop the believers. Do you have any objections?" The blue-clothed man cupped his hands. "I'll follow the lady's orders." He then raised his head. "What about the lady's other avatar?" The purple-clothed man frowned. "From now on, you will be in charge of all matters concerning the holy religion in the capital. You may act as you see fit." "Yes, lady," the blue-clothed man said loudly. The blue-clothed men behind him all looked envious. The young man was the youngest blue-clothed emissary of the holy religion. Because of his outstanding abilities, he had risen from a common believer to a blue-clothed emissary in less than a year. If he were to advance one step further, he would become a purple-clothed emissary, second only to the lady and the protectors. Now that the believers in the capital were handed over to him, it was only a matter of time before he became a purple-clothed emissary. "Li Yi," Within the courtyard, the middle-aged nun looked in a certain direction and slowly recited the name. The Wang clan was going to hold a glass auction soon. This was a business that involved at least 1,000,000 taels of silver. Perhaps it was because he had seen too much silver and treasures in the past few days, but at this moment, Li Yi actually calmed down. Duan Wu and Li Yingkai were playing marbles in the courtyard. The two of them didn't have much fun for many days. The old granny was going to send this brat to a math college. After a while, Duan Wu would also have to go to the Princess Royal Highness's female college. The two elders were talking to Rui in the room. Li Yi had accidentally walked in and was thrown out. He turned around and glanced at them. He was really worried that the two elders would bring up a sensitive topic. He had been having a headache over this matter for the past few days. Looking up at the sky, he estimated that it was about time. After all, he still had to make a trip to Hibiscus Garden today. Walking out of the door, he saw Feng squatting under a tree, looking up at the sky. "Let's go." Li Yi glanced at him and got into the carriage. Inside the room, old madam of the Li family pulled Rui's hand and asked anxiously, "Do you like to eat sour food these days?" Rui nodded and said, "A little." "Tell me, did your period come last month?" Although old madam he was blind, at this moment, her lifeless eyes seemed to be glowing. She hurriedly leaned over and asked in a low voice. Rui blushed and said, last month, not last month." Old Madam Li's face immediately revealed an ecstatic expression. She said, Quick, go find a doctor. You two are so old, why don't you know anything?" Looking at old Madam Li, who hurriedly went out to make arrangements, Rui opened her mouth, but in the end, she didn't say anything. It was just a habitual discomfort. Even a grandmaster couldn't avoid these matters with women. Sometimes, she even wished that she wasn't a grandmaster. Now that the Li family was considered influential, they naturally had to find the best doctor. After an hour, a famous doctor in the capital was helped out of the carriage. He was dizzy from the jolting along the way and first held onto a tree outside to regain his composure. Before he could regain his composure, he was dragged into the mansion by a man. The man surnamed Su said impatiently, "If you want to vomit, you can vomit later. Let's get down to business first." The doctor had a helpless expression on his face, but he also knew that he couldn't afford to offend this family, so he was dragged in by the man. Not long after, the doctor withdrew his hand from the woman's wrist. "How is it? Are you pregnant?" Old Madam Li asked impatiently. Although the woman didn't say anything, there was a look of anticipation on her face. "Pregnant?" The doctor looked at old Madam Li in confusion and shook his head. "I haven't felt the pulse of pregnancy. Young madam, you've been worrying too much lately and have been depressed. Wait for me to write you a prescription. You'll recover after a period of time." Old Madam Li was startled for a moment before a trace of disappointment appeared on her face. She immediately smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble you, doctor?" She turned to look at Rui and held her hand. "It's all right. You're still young. There will be plenty of opportunities in the future." Rui nodded and smiled faintly. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the doctor handed the prescription to old Madam Li. Before he left, he turned back and said, "Mental illness requires mental medicine. Pills can only be used as a supplement. Young madam, you should let go of the knot in your heart as soon as possible." When he finished speaking and turned around, a carriage came from the side and slowly stopped in front of the Li mansion. A white-haired old man carrying a medicine box got out of the carriage. When he raised his head and saw the people at the gate, he was slightly stunned. Rui looked at the old man and walked up to him, saying, "Dr. Lu, my husband just went out. I'm afraid he won't be back until very late." Lu Jimin shook his head and said, "I'm not here to see County Uncle Li. 2 days ago, County Uncle Li said that Madam Li wasn't feeling well and asked me to come and see her. It's just that I've been delayed by something these past 2 days." Rui smiled and said, "If that's the case, Dr. Lu, come in and have a seat." She only vaguely knew that this Dr. Lu seemed to be an imperial physician in the palace and had a close relationship with her husband. Even if she didn't need him to treat her, she couldn't neglect him. At this moment, old Madam Li was disappointed and didn't have much interest in this Dr. Lu. As for the doctor just now, he looked at Lu Jimin with slight dissatisfaction. After thinking for a moment, he actually went in again. "Xiaofan, go make a cup of tea for Dr. Lu." After entering the hall, Rui first ordered Xiaofan. "Yes, Mississippi. The servant girl immediately trotted away. After Lu Jimin sat down, he directly looked at Rui and said, "I don't know if Madam Li can let me take your pulse first." Rui smiled and said, "My body has been much better these past 2 days. There's no need to bother Dr. Lu." She really didn't want to hear the same words a second time. Old Madam Li came over and said, "Your health is more important. Let Dr. Lu take another look." She was frightened when she heard the words heart disease and heart medicine just now. It's not a bad thing to have another doctor take a look. Moreover, in her eyes, the doctor who came later had a fluttering white beard and a sage-like appearance. He seemed to be more reliable than the previous doctor. As for the doctor standing on the side, he just glanced at Lu Jimin with contempt and didn't say anything. Since he had already been invited, there was no need to invite another doctor. Didn't inviting another doctor mean that they didn't trust him? He wanted to see how good the medical skills of the old man opposite him were. Old Madam Li's words couldn't be disobeyed. Rui thought about it and sat down on the other side. She stretched out her wrist and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Dr. Lu." Lu Jimin smiled and placed one hand on her wrist. He slowly closed his eyes. Playing tricks. Seeing the old man's method of taking a pulse, the doctor's expression changed at first, but then he revealed a sneer and his face was full of mockery. It was unknown if anyone in the world knew how to use such a legendary technique. Chapter 638. The old lady looked at Lu Jimin anxiously and asked, "Is this true? Is Rui really pregnant?" "What are you talking about? What are you talking about?" The doctor suddenly jumped up from his chair and looked at the old lady with dissatisfaction. "What do you mean by this? Do you know who is standing in front of you? This is the imperial physician of this dynasty. Lord Lu's medical skills are unpredictable and unparalleled. If he says it's a pregnancy, it's a pregnancy. It can't be wrong." "Shut up!" Lu Jimin glared at him. Even he didn't dare to talk to the old lady of the Li family like this. If Uncle Li heard this, what would he think of him? "Lord Lu, do you want to take a closer look?" The old lady was still a little uneasy and asked anxiously. Lu Jimin smiled and said, "Don't worry, old lady. Madam Li is pregnant not long ago. It's normal that ordinary doctors can't see it. Even I almost couldn't see it just now." "Mrs. Pregnant." Xiaofan put the tea on the table and hurried over. She looked at Rui's belly with her mouth wide open and asked with surprise and joy, "Ba, I wonder if Uncle Li is here. My master has something for you." A voice came from outside the door. The old lady turned around and looked at the young monk. She said in surprise, "It's Master Ming Jing." "Is Master Tan Yin here?" Master Tan Yin had a high status in the hearts of Buddhist believers in the capital. The old lady couldn't neglect him and hurried forward to ask. The young monk shook his head and said, "Master is meditating in the temple. He asked me to bring 2 scriptures and a prescription for Uncle Li." The little monk took out a cloth bag from his bosom and handed it over respectfully. "Prescription?" Lu Jimin came over and glanced at the prescription on the 2 scriptures. He said with a smile, "Master Tan Yin's medical skills are indeed worthy of his reputation. This prescription is used to regulate and stabilize the fetus. It seems that the master has already seen that Madam Li is pregnant. You don't worry now, do you?" "Don't worry, don't worry." All the wrinkles on Madame Dowager's face smoothed out. She looked at the young monk and said, "Little Master Ming Jing, please go back and thank Master Tan Yin for us. I will go up the mountain to fulfill my vow another day and offer enough incense for Cold Mountain Temple." When he turned back to look at Rui, his expression immediately changed. He walked over to help her and said, "Why are you still standing here? Hurry up and sit down." "Old Madam Rui had just opened her mouth to speak when she was rudely interrupted. "What about me? This is a serious matter. You youngsters won't understand." The old madam waved her hand and said, "In the future, you will stay at home and not go anywhere. You are not allowed to do anything. You are not allowed to do chores like washing and cooking. Leave it all to the servants in the manor." "Which rich family in the capital would spoil their servants like you do?" Madame Dowager turned around and said to the 2 maidservants outside the door with a sullen face, "Did you hear that? If I see that you don't serve young madam well in the future, I'll kick you out of the house." "Got it," the 2 maidservants hurriedly replied. In the time it took to drink a cup of tea, this news had spread throughout the Li manor. Housekeeper Li, who had always been harsh, was rarely generous. The maidservants and servants all received a lot of money. Even the horses in the stables were fed 2 handfuls of fresh grass. When Lu Jimin came, he only carried a small medicine box. When he left, even the carriage was stuffed full of gifts. The young monk was carrying a large pile of boxes. Even his head could not be seen. Sigh. The doctor from the capital walked out of the Li family's gate and put away a copper coin threaded with a red thread. He sighed with a face full of regret. "Hello, second young mistress." Mississippi Lu walked through the gate and happened to see a man riding a horse straight out of the manor. She frowned. When she walked through the gate, she saw the joyful expressions on the faces of the maidservants in the manor. She was slightly startled. In Hibiscus Garden, it was a rare occasion of the year. This glazed Buddha statue, the starting price is 8,000 taels. 10,000 taels. 11,000 taels. 12,000 taels. The monks did not reject anyone who came to the Buddha statue. It was not just the capital. 3 days was enough for the monks from the neighboring prefectures to rush over upon hearing the news. In fact, ever since the old emperor invited many senior monks to appraise the Buddha statue, many monks from other places had rushed over. Although they had missed the stained glaze appraisal conference, they had made it to the Wang family's charity sale. The monks were extremely generous. They did not hesitate to shout out 10,000 taels of silver. This also made the nobles in the capital realize who were the truly rich. At the very least, they would hesitate to take out so much money at once. For those who did not have much money, it was no different from digging out their hearts. Fortunately, the Wang family did not stand on ceremony with the monks. However, the prices of the other glazed wares and jewelry were much cheaper than those in the palace. However, when one thought about the large amount of glaze they had obtained from foreign merchants, it was not surprising that the prices were a little lower. Of course, some of the small incidents that happened would occasionally surprise the crowd. For example, the Wang family directly offered 50,000 taels of silver for a glazed statue that resembled the living old master of the Cui family, which was almost 5 times the price of a Buddha statue of the same size. The Cui family almost flipped the table on the spot, but in the end, they had to swallow their anger and buy it. If the old master's glazed statue were to be bought by someone else, the Cui family would lose face. It was not something that could be bought back with 50,000 taels of silver. When Fong walked out of Hibiscus Garden, he was still rubbing his hands. Li Yi could even feel his whole body trembling. Come to think of it, this was like a penniless pauper suddenly mastering the godly skill of turning stone into gold. The fact that he could still stand there so steadily showed that his mental fortitude was not bad. To a certain extent, this was even better than turning stone into gold. After all, glaze was more expensive than gold. In fact, Li Yi did not understand Fong's behavior. With Fong's current wealth, buying a big house was not a problem at all. If he could get past Madame Fong, a beautiful concubine could enter the house at any time. However, although he had money, he had never spent it. The money for Zhuzi's marriage should have been enough a year ago, right? Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that he was the same. The money that he had worked so hard to earn was all squandered by Mississippi Lu before he could spend it. What's wrong? The carriage suddenly stopped. Li Yi remembered that he had just left Hibiscus Garden not long ago. There was no reason for him to be home now, so he lifted the curtain and asked, "Young master, do you want to go in and have a look?" Fong's face showed a hesitant expression, and he pointed to the alley beside him and said, "I'm not going today," Li Yi said as he lowered the curtain after taking a look. "Okay." Fong nodded, got off the carriage, and lifted the curtain. Li Yi jumped off the carriage and walked to the alley. Li, Miss is not home today." Xiao Cui opened the door and shook her head. "Not home? Where did she go?" Li Yi looked at her and asked. "She just went to the shop. Miss may come back with Sister Ruoqing in the evening." Xiao Cui looked at him and said, Li, do you want to come in and wait for a while?" "No need." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'll go first." Xiao Cui stood at the door and watched her walk away before closing the door. She walked to the yard and asked, "Miss, why did you lie to Li and say that you were not home?" Zheng Zumo shook her head and did not speak. There was another knock on the door. "It must be Li coming back again." Xiao Cui asked as she walked, "Miss, what should I say this time?" She opened the door a crack, poked her head out, and said, Li, Miss said she is not home you. She was startled and looked at the stranger in front of her. She asked in confusion, "May I ask who you are looking for?" Hearing footsteps that were different from Xiao Chui's, Zheng Zumo took a deep breath and was about to speak when she saw the person standing in the yard. After a moment of shock, her face immediately turned pale. The middle-aged man sighed and said, "Zumo, you have been in the capital for so long. Why haven't you gone back to see?" Chapter 639. Home. Zheng Zumo gave a self-deprecating smile. 13 years ago I had no home. Do you still remember what happened 13 years ago? I don't dare to forget. Zheng Zumo shook her head. When she looked up at the middle-aged man again, her expression had returned to calmness. She said, "What brings you here today, Assistant Minister Zhang?" Feeling the alienation in her words, the middle-aged man sighed and said, "I was just a small official in the Ministry of Revenue. I couldn't change the overall situation and could only watch my brother fall into trouble. Later, I also went to the musical house to find you. At that time, I learned that you had been ransomed with a large sum of money. All these years, I have never given up looking for you." The middle-aged man looked at her and said slowly, "That day, Zijian said that the person he saw in the drunken moon tower seemed to be you. Only then did I know that you had come to the capital. These days, I have been afraid to see you because I am worried that you still can't forget what happened in the past. What else can I do for you, Assistant Minister?" The middle-aged man looked at her and said seriously, "Come back. The Zhang family is no longer the Zhang family 13 years ago. I promise that from now on, no one will bully you. You are still the young lady of the Zhang family. I want to make it up to you all these years. The Zhang family is indeed no longer the Zhang family 13 years ago, and I am not the young lady of the Zhang family 13 years ago." Zheng Zumo looked calm. She shook her head and said, "If there is nothing else, Assistant Minister Zheng, please go back." "Zumo." A trace of pain appeared on the middle-aged man's face. He said, "Until now, you still refuse to call me second uncle? Xiaocui, see the guest out." Zheng Zumo stood up and walked toward the inner yard. The moment she turned around, 2 lines of tears fell silently from her pretty face. "I will come again." The middle-aged man sighed and looked up at her. "There is one thing I need to remind you of. Stay away from that Earl of Chong'an, the farther the better." Zheng Zumo's footsteps paused, and then she sped up and disappeared behind the moon gate. "Please go back." Xiaocui stood behind her, glanced at the middle-aged man, and said politely, "Father, how is it?" The young man was waiting at the door. Seeing the middle-aged man come out, he immediately stepped forward and asked, "Let's talk when we get back." The middle-aged man raised his head and glanced at the tea house opposite him. There were already several people walking over here. He withdrew his gaze and walked towards the entrance of the alley. Not long after, an angry and embarrassed voice came from the carriage. "What? She actually refused? Does she think she is? Pa?" The middle-aged man slapped the young man's face and said coldly, "Shut up. If it wasn't for your uncle protecting us and taking all the blame, do you think you would still be sitting in the carriage today?" The middle-aged man glanced at him and said, "We owe her too much. Drunken Mo is my eldest brother's only flesh and blood. Fortunately, we found her. Otherwise, my conscience would never be at ease. No matter what grudges you have between the two of you from today onwards, everything will be written off." "I understand, father." The young man covered his face and nodded. But when he occasionally turned his head, his eyes were filled with disdain and resentment. What debt? What flesh and blood? One made him suffer for several months, and the other ruined his future, becoming the laughingstock of the capital. From then on, he could only live at home and wait for death. Even if the king of Shu ascended to the throne in the future, there would be an indelible stain on him. The hatred was as deep as the sea. How could it be written off? The carriage stopped in front of the mansion. When the middle-aged man got off the carriage, the gatekeeper came forward to report, "Master, several lords have been waiting in the mansion for a long time. The palace seems to have sent someone over." The middle-aged man was stunned for a moment before he quickly stepped into the mansion. "Lord Tseng, you're finally back. We've been waiting for a long time." As soon as he stepped into the hall, several people stood up from their chairs and came forward to greet him. Sorry. I just went out to deal with some matters. I wonder what's the matter with your sudden visit?" The few of them did not speak. Instead, They turned their heads and looked at a eunuch sitting in the main seat. Does the imperial concubine have any orders? Zhang Shichen's heart stirred. He immediately stepped forward and asked. The eunuch's voice was feminine and harsh. The imperial concubine wants me to ask you. What kind of climate do you plan to see Li Yi form in the imperial court? The expressions of the few people changed when they heard this. You're on your own. The eunuch only said a few words before he floated away, leaving the few people in the room looking at each other. One of them sighed and said, "It seems that the imperial concubine is still dissatisfied after the incident in Chongyuan Palace." Another person nodded and said, "The imperial concubine's worries are not unreasonable. Who would have thought that a small character who could be easily crushed would grow to such an extent? Now, he is no longer relying on the protection of His Majesty. But it's not so easy to touch him now. Not only do we have to face His Majesty, but we also have to face half of the imperial court." Someone said worriedly. The current Li Yi, the Earl of Chang'an, was no longer the inexperienced and insignificant person that he was a year ago. If one counted carefully, how many things had he done, directly or indirectly, and how much support had he received from the courtiers over the past year? He was not a person of the officialdom. They were powerless against such a person a year ago. So, what could they do after a year? If they really had to face it head-on, some of them might even be smashed to pieces. This matter can't be rushed. We need to think about it at length. Zhang Shichen thought for a moment and said, "I think the others have also received the imperial concubine's instructions. Let's act according to the circumstances." Everyone nodded when they heard this. This time, the imperial concubine should be serious. That county Earl Li would probably have a hard time in the future. Ba ba ba. Li Yi waved his sleeves to sweep away the dust on the road. He looked at old Su and said discontentedly, "What's the matter that makes you so anxious? Is it because your wife is pregnant?" "No." Old Su jumped off the horse and said excitedly, "Sir, it's the first Mississippi. The first miss is pregnant." "What?" Li Yi's body shook, and his eyes widened. He grabbed his arm and asked, "What did you say?" "The first miss is pregnant." Old Su panted heavily and said, "Just now, an imperial physician surnamed Lu went to our house. After feeling the pulse, he said that the first miss is pregnant. Also, a monk sent a prescription to prevent the miscarriage. Young master, you should go back quickly." "Stop talking. The young master has already left." Fong patted him on the shoulder and said, pointing to the horse that was galloping away, "Hurry up." He waved the reins, and the carriage started slowly. "Haha, young master, this time, we must hold a banquet for 3 days. When the young master is born, we will hold a banquet for him for a month." Fong got off the carriage and rushed into the mansion. He stepped into the yard and said with a smile. The Fong family's sister-in-law came out of the room. She glanced at him and said, "Keep your voice down. Don't disturb the first Mississippi." Then she asked discontentedly, "Where is the young master? Why didn't he come back with you?" "What's more important than this?" Fong was stunned for a moment and said, "Didn't the young master come back on horseback long ago?" "No." The Fong family's sister-in-law looked confused. A Taoist nun in a loose Taoist robe led a horse and walked on a path in the forest. Li Yi sat on the horse and looked at the Taoist nun. He asked, "Senior, where are you taking me?" Chapter 640. The Qi Kingdom. The middle-aged Taoist nun didn't look back and said lightly, "The Qi Kingdom?" Li Yi's face changed. The place he wanted to go most now was his home, and the person he wanted to see the most was Rui, not the Qi Kingdom. He didn't want to talk nonsense with this Taoist nun here. Rui was pregnant. They were going to have a child. Rui would no longer have a knot in her heart because of this matter. This was the happiest thing that had happened to her since she came to this world. F*ck those Taoist nuns, and F*ck the state of Qi. If she hadn't hit his acupoints, and if this Taoist nun hadn't been a master, he would have rushed back now. "Put me down. I want to go home." Li Yi looked at her and said, "What do you want?" "I'll give you whatever I can." "As for silver, how much do you want?" The Taoist nun kept walking and asked indifferently, "The colored glass that appeared in the capital recently was all made by you, right?" "You want colored glass?" Li Yi was stunned and said, "You should have told me earlier that you wanted colored glass. Let me go back, and I'll tell you how to make colored glass. You can sell it in the Qi Kingdom or the Zhao Kingdom. If you don't believe me, you can go back with me. The colored glass was about to become worthless glass. Even if this Taoist nun knew how to make it, it would be useless. Besides, once they got home, it was uncertain who would rob who. The Taoist nun looked back and said, "If I were you." Li Yi suddenly felt a strange cold wind blowing around him. "So, you won't let me go back no matter what? You have to go with me." The Taoist nun looked at him and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. I'll let you go in 1 or 2 years, or at most 3 or 5 years. At that time, as long as you want, you can not only enjoy endless glory and wealth, but also be above tens of thousands of people. Forget about this kind of low-level MLM brainwashing." Li Yi lowered his head and cursed, "F***CKU. What did you say? Must you go? I have to go. Can I write a letter and send it back?" 3 days later. There's news from the Skynet. Sir and a Taoist nun were seen outside the capital today. At that time, Master was riding on a horse, and the two of them were heading west. We've also found out the identity of the Taoist nun. She's the leader of a cult and is known as the Empress of Heaven. She once participated in the Hero Assembly. Strength assessment. Master. At present, we can only confirm that they should have gone west. Their exact whereabouts are unknown. Lu Luo spoke quickly. After carefully sorting out the information he had just received from Skynet, he immediately sent it back. "It's her? Why did she kidnap you?" Rui frowned. "I'll go after them immediately." "Where are you going?" Madame Dowager grabbed her and said, "You're pregnant, and you're a woman. Where can you go?" "I'll immediately send someone to the palace to report this matter to His Majesty. His Majesty will definitely send someone to investigate." "It's useless." Rui shook her head. How could Madame Dowager know how terrifying the Taoist nun was? Madame Dowager shook her head repeatedly and said, "No, absolutely not. If anything happens to you, how can I explain it to Er when he returns? It's all my fault. It's all my fault." Feng squatted on the ground and grabbed his hair. His eyes were bloodshot. Rui glanced at him and shook her head. "Uncle Feng, don't be like this. The Taoist nun has the strength of a master. All the guards combined are no match for her. Don't worry. That boy is very clever. Little E, you stay at home and take care of yourself. I'll go there myself." A voice came from behind. Second granduncle walked in leisurely with his hands behind his back. Where are you going?" Madame Dowager asked in confusion. Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, "No, I can't fight with others in the future. If second granduncle leaves, what will happen to the family?" The old man frowned and said, "That's really troublesome. Recently, there were more and more uninvited guests who secretly visited the family, and their strength was getting stronger and stronger. They used all kinds of means. Rui couldn't fight with others in the future. If he left, the guards of the Li family, including those ordinary masters, could not guarantee that nothing would go wrong. It was really a headache. I'll go." Mississippi Lu clenched her sword and said, "No." Rui refused immediately. "You're no match for the Taoist nun. I'll act according to circumstances." "No." Outside the Li family's mansion, the servants of the Li family looked at an unfamiliar old man standing at the door and asked, "May I ask who you're looking for?" Although the old man was a little sloppy, the people who could come to the county earl's mansion were all well-known figures in the capital. They didn't dare to judge a person by his appearance. Killing a small county earl. If it weren't for the fact that I'm short of money these days, I wouldn't dare to do such a stupid thing. The sloppy old man threw a milky white lump into his mouth and said, "Is County Earl of Chong and Li Yi in there?" Although he was a grandmaster, grandmasters were not above the common people. They also needed to eat and drink. Although it was shameful to do this kind of killer's work, he had never cared about this kind of thing in the past. This time, he was asked by a family with whom he had a little connection when he was young to take the life of County Earl Li. 100,000 taels of silver was the reward. The servant of the Li family said honestly, "No." The sloppy old man was stunned and asked, "Where did he go?" "He went out and hasn't come back yet." The old man frowned and said, "In that case, I'll wait here for him to come back." As soon as the old man finished speaking, The servant only felt that everything in front of him went black, and then he collapsed on the ground powerlessly. You're lucky. 100,000 taels of silver for one life. I said one life and I mean it. I'm a man of my word. The sloppy old man murmured and knocked out several maids and servants in the courtyard. He also casually took care of several people who looked like guards. Hearing a sound coming from a courtyard, he strode in. I only kill. The sloppy old man didn't finish his sentence. He was stunned when he saw several figures standing in the courtyard. He immediately bowed to the ground and said, I'm sorry. I went the wrong way. Cough, cough. After saying that, he turned around and left without any hesitation. Because he was too nervous, the candy just now was stuck in his throat, and he didn't dare to swallow it immediately. Come back. An old voice came from behind. The sloppy old man stopped, turned around, and knelt on the ground. I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please spare my life, Senior. His voice was trembling, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Not bad. The old man looked down at him and nodded with satisfaction. He said, Get up. What's the matter? Get up and talk. Chapter 641. Did you hear me? Second great uncle asked while lying on the rocking chair. Yes. The sloppy old man stood aside respectfully and nodded like a chicken pecking rice. Second great uncle glared at him. Listen carefully. Hurry up and go. The sloppy old man hurriedly reminded him. Senior, I forgot the antidote. The old man threw a porcelain bottle over and said, There are 100 antidotes here. Each one can suppress the poison in your body for 2 days. That is to say, 7 months at most. If you still can't bring her back after 7 months. What will happen? The sloppy old man asked with a trembling voice. Her limbs will be stiff and she will bleed from her orifices. Within 2 hours, she will turn into a pool of pus. The sloppy old man's expression changed drastically and he said, Senior, can you give me a few more? The world is so big and it's so difficult to find a person. What if you still can't find her after 7 months? Second great uncle nodded and said, So you can't delay. The sloppy old man was speechless. Not long after, the sloppy old man walked out of the Lee family with a horse, looking dispirited. He lifted his sleeve and looked at his arm, looking even more dispirited. This time it was a real poison. Damned Taoist nun, damned old monster. He quickly got on the horse and put away the token in his bosom. With this thing, he would be able to gather enough information along the way. Go. The old man waved his whip and a cloud of dust quickly rose on the road. Second great uncle. I'm worried about my husband. How about I go with him? Rui walked forward with an anxious look on her face. What's the use of you going? Second great uncle glanced at her and said, You're pregnant now. Can you fight with a guru? Don't use your true chi before the child is born. There has never been a lack of geniuses in the martial arts world. There were peerless masters who reached the top at a young age. Why didn't they have children? Also, have you forgotten why your father destroyed his own martial arts? If there's any mistake, you two won't be able to live in peace for the rest of your lives. Rui bit her lip and finally fell silent. Where's Rui? The old man suddenly asked. She went to Lu Meng. Rui looked up at the west and sighed. I wonder how much Xiang has suffered. These fruits are all wilted and not fresh at all. Do you have pears? Give me 2 fresh pears. Li Yi laid comfortably on a soft bed and pointed at the blue-clothed man in the room. Where can I find fresh pears for you in this season? The blue-clothed man's eyes were almost spitting fire. He said angrily, Moreover, this is a ship. Don't go too far. Are you coming? Wait a minute. The blue-robed man's face fell as he strode out of the room. Li Yi rubbed his head and threw a candied date into his mouth. He had been on the boat for 2 hours and his head was a little dizzy. Meeting that damned Taoist nun aside, today was actually a very happy day. He was finally going to have a child. This was something that he had never experienced in his 2 lifetimes. However, Rui must be very worried now. Xiao Huan must be crying. Mississippi Lu must be unhappy too. He had promised her another 100,000 taels of silver in a few days. He didn't know how long it would take. The old emperor was probably not in a good mood either. He had earned a lot of money these days. He had planned to persuade him to confiscate a few people's properties. This was the fastest way to earn money, but he had to wait until he came back. He still hoped that he could hang on for a little longer. If he died early, the Jing kingdom would be in chaos. After all, the king of Shu would not be able to return to the capital alive. The other princes would definitely be locked in a fierce battle. At that time, the eldest princess, Yongning, and the proud Lolita. The pears you wanted. The blue-clothed man walked in and placed 2 yellow pears on the plate on the table. You really have them? Li Yi asked in surprise. The corner of the blue-clothed man's mouth twitched. He had almost rummaged through the warehouse to find these 2 pears. This despicable fellow, how dare he make fun of me like this? If not for her ladyship's instructions, he swore that he would have killed him. Unfortunately, they are not fresh. Li Yi shook his head and said, Oh yes, do you have wine? Drinking wine is a hindrance. Her ladyship forbids it. Bring a jar of wine over. Let me tell you, don't go too far. Are you going to bring it or not? This wine doesn't have any taste. Li Yi shook his head. However, it was fine. If he really brought the wine from Rui workshop, he would not be able to handle it. Suddenly, Li Yi thought of something. He pointed outside and said, I saw a pleasure boat just now. Do you want to call 2 women from there? Forget it. Seeing that the blue-clothed man was on the verge of exploding, Li Yi waved his hand and said, I don't need women. It's rare to be happy today. Let me treat you to a drink. Her ladyship said that we can't drink wine. Where are we going? Li Yi took a bite of the pear and asked with a smile. A trace of confusion appeared on the blue-clothed man's face. He said, Of course, we are going to the Qi kingdom. The root of our holy religion is in the Qi kingdom. I'm not bragging, but we have 100,000 believers in the Qi kingdom. So many? Li Yi had a surprised expression on his face. A multi-level marketing organization that had 100,000 members could be regarded as a classic example. Who didn't know how to brainwash? If he could get these people over. The blue-clothed man showed a disdainful expression and said, This is nothing. Not only the Qi kingdom, but also your Jing kingdom. The holy religion has many believers. We deliberately took a detour to go to the Shu kingdom. I won't be fooled by you again. You can only stay on the boat. You can't go anywhere. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Then I'll go and ask your ladyship. After a quarter of an hour. Look, isn't it more interesting to go out than to stay on the boat? Li Yi looked back at the dozen people behind him, pointed to the front and said, There is a brothel in front. Go in and watch the opera and listen to the stories. If you see anything you like, just buy it. I'll be the host today. Remember to go back and ask your ladyship for reimbursement. Chapter 642. Usually, they did not pay much attention to places like the brothel. Seeing it today, the apostles of the holy religion were surprised to find that the play in the brothel was actually so interesting. By Suzhen, humans and demons cannot love each other. The sea of bitterness is boundless. Repent and you will be saved. On the stage, a monk wearing a bright yellow kasaya held an alms bowl in his hand and pointed it at the woman in white on the ground. The woman looked up at the monk and said in a sad voice, Fahai, I and the official are really in love. Why are you so aggressive? Amit Ba. The monk said the name of Buddha and sighed. In that case, I have to accept you. The audience under the stage shook their heads and sighed. What a love between humans and demons. The Legend of the White Snake was a long-lasting play. Even after watching it several times, they could still see some freshness in it. You old bald donkey, why did you break them up? I will kill you. A young man rushed onto the stage angrily and kicked the monk to the ground. The alms bowl rolled far away. The monk who was kicked to the ground was stunned. The white snake was stunned. The audience under the stage was stunned. The dozen apostles were also stunned. The plot of the Legend of the White Snake was wonderful, and the performance of the 2 actors on the stage was even more vivid. However, it was rare to see someone like this young man who was immersed in the play. Obviously, he really regarded the actor who played Fahai as an old bald donkey who wanted to break up the lovers. Several strong men hurried onto the stage and walked in the direction of the young man. However, they were stopped by 2 men who jumped onto the stage. Get out of the way, don't interfere with the performance. Several strong men were about to come over. However, Although the two people were thin and weak, their strength was not small. The few men could not cross their line of defense at all. That Fahai tore off the kasaya on his body. He wanted to cry but had no tears. He said, "I am not Fahai." He rubbed his butt, and his heart was really full of mixed feelings. Although he had been kicked, as an actor, what could be more proud of than playing a role to the point where the audience couldn't tell what was inside or outside the play? "I am sorry, I am sorry." The young man finally came to his senses and said awkwardly. He jumped off the stage and said in a low voice, "What are you waiting for? Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" After saying that, he quickly walked out of the door. The few of them exchanged looks and shook their heads. He was the one who was embarrassed, not them. However, the old monk had acted really well. They nearly had the urge to jump up and beat him to death. Seeing that the young man had already walked out, they hurriedly followed. "Haha, that young man was really interesting. It's also because of that guy's good acting. He really brought Fahai to life. To be honest, I also wanted to rush up and kick him." "Haha, I agree, I agree." A burst of laughter came from below the stage. The monk climbed up from the stage and said with a smile, "Thank you for your appreciation. This show is over. The next show, Flooding Jinshan, will begin in 15 minutes. Amidst the laughter of the crowd, he slowly retreated behind the curtain and took out a small wooden tablet from his bosom. After carefully examining it, his expression suddenly changed. "Quick, prepare the horses. We're going to the capital." At the same time, Li Yi, who had walked out of the brothel, secretly sighed. The brothels scattered in various places would only hire some people to be responsible for maintaining order. They were all ordinary men, and few of them knew martial arts. The 11 people following him were not easy to deal with. Moreover, the Taoist nun was not far away. He knew better than anyone else the strength of a guru. The only thing he could do at the moment was to send a message back. "Thank God my husband is fine." As Ru Yi held the wooden token in her hand, her worried heart finally calmed down. A bald man panted and said, "It was not convenient for His Excellency to reveal his identity at that time, so he made this urgent plan. I didn't dare to delay and immediately came here overnight." "You've worked hard." "Not at all, not at all." The man smiled and said, "It's His Excellency who has given us performers a living. It's our honor to do something for His Excellency." "Thank you very much." Rui looked at him and turned her head to say, "Uncle Li, go to the cashier and withdraw 1,000 taels of silver." The little maid ran out with swollen eyes and said in a panic, "First miss, second miss is missing. She hasn't come back since last night." The morning assembly had just ended. The courtiers walked out of the main hall with confusion, shock, and doubt on their faces. It was rare for so many emotions to appear on the faces of hundreds of officials on such a large scale. Uncle Li of County Li was missing. Uncle Li, who was the most favored by the emperor in today's court and could influence half of the court, was missing. His Majesty was in a very bad mood today. The morning assembly that usually lasted at least 2 hours ended in less than a quarter of an hour. The strangest thing was that an official was kicked by the furious old General Shui just because he had a little doubt about the calculation school. His Majesty did not say a word and just announced the end of the assembly. Until now, they still hadn't recovered from this news. An hour later, in an official's mansion. "Li Yi is missing. Should we? Forget it. Let's put this matter aside for now. If he was still in the capital, this would be a dispute in the court. But now that he is missing, if we take the opportunity to make a move, I'm afraid it will anger a lot of people." "You saw it, old General Shui in the main hall just now. I also don't think it's appropriate. Whether it's those people in the imperial court or His Majesty, they won't allow anyone to add insult to injury at this time. In my opinion, Li Yi has offended so many people that there's an 80% chance he'll never return. Without him, there's nothing to worry about." They did not expect the situation to change so quickly. They quickly finalized some things. Without Li Yi, there is one less biggest stumbling block in front of the King of Shu. Congratulations, congratulations. Zumo, what's wrong with you these days? Are you not feeling well? Wan Ruoqing looked at Zhang Zumo, who was sitting on the stone bench in the yard in a daze, and asked worriedly. "Zumo? Zumo?" Wan Ruoqing walked over and waved her hand in front of her eyes. Zhang Zumo came back to her senses and said, "Don't bother. I've asked Xiao Chui to buy breakfast." Wan Ruoqing was startled. She reached out and touched her forehead, saying, "It's not hot, but you've been really strange these days. I'll ask Yuzhu to get a doctor." "There's really no need." Xing Zumo waved her hand. At this time, Xiao Chui ran in from outside in a panic and said loudly, "Outside, outside, everyone is saying that Li is missing." Wan Ruoqing's expression froze, and Zheng Zumo stood up abruptly. "Cheers!" In the drunken moon tower, several young men frequently clinked their glasses, their voices full of joy. "That scourge has finally received retribution. I really hope I never see him again. Yes, if he's going to disappear, it's better to be thorough. Every time I think about this, I can't help but want to laugh." Several famous playboys in the capital swept away their gloomy mood and their faces were full of smiles. "I heard that he has 2 lovers in Willow Lane?" Li Jianren's face showed an inexplicable smile, and he said, "This time, he can't even protect himself. Let's see who can protect them. Say, even if he can come back and see that those 2 lovers are already, what will he think?" There was another burst of laughter. Suddenly, someone looked at the young man in the corner and said, "Zijian, I heard that Miss Zhang, who caused us so much trouble last time, has something to do with your family?" Zhang Zijian shook his head and said, "What Miss Zhang? I don't know." Li Jianren laughed and gritted his teeth. "If that's the case, then I won't be polite." At the same time, in a courtyard somewhere in the capital, a man with thin cheeks and wearing a blue robe looked at the dozens of people in the courtyard and said, "You are all the elites of the holy religion left in the capital. The Empress has ordered us to lie low and endure. However, although the Empress has left the capital, there is still her incarnation in the capital. Since we have entered the holy religion, it is our duty to protect the Empress and strengthen the holy religion." Chapter 643. Some officials in the capital city had been waiting anxiously for a long time. Finally, the news of the imperial concubine came. The series of measures against the Earl of Chang'an was temporarily cancelled. This made them heave a long sigh of relief in their hearts. The atmosphere in the court was not right these days. Of course, this kind of abnormality was mostly reflected in His Majesty. There were already quite a few ignorant officials who were reprimanded in court for making small mistakes, so there were quite a few who were demoted. Until now, the officials realized that the position of the County Earl Li in His Majesty's heart was probably higher than they had expected. Besides rejoicing, there was also a little fear in their hearts. They were afraid because if they really chose to fight with him head-on, they were afraid that the loss on their side would be too great to bear. As for rejoicing, it was naturally because such a person was not in the capital city, and it was very likely that he would never come back. Otherwise, the return of His Highness, the King of Shu, would be greatly hindered. No one wanted to have such an enemy. Not to mention how many people stood behind him. Just counting the school, many officials were tied to him. Once the accounts were checked, there would be a purge in the court. The power that belonged to His Highness, the King of Shu, really could not stand any more torment. After some depression and wind and rain, the capital city returned to the surface of calmness. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Emperor Jing put down the memorial, rubbed between his eyebrows, and said in a deep voice, "Send more people. Send 10 executives in the palace out. If they can't find him, don't come back." Changda's figure silently retreated. In the wide square of the Gonlu Hall, a figure was moving, and the sword shadows were dense. A gray-haired old woman stood in the distance and looked at it, sighing slowly. Not long after, the figure stopped and walked here. He did not look at the golden egg fried rice on the stone steps, but carried the jar of wine beside him into the hall. In the mathematics college, the classroom was empty at lunchtime. Li Xian looked out of the window absent-mindedly. Another handsome man came in with a lunchbox and put it in front of him. After glancing at him, he walked out without saying a word. Outside the college, Li Han's chubby figure had lost a lot of weight. At this moment, he was standing in the corner with his hands behind his back, loudly reprimanding several young men. 10 days. The young maidservant sat in the courtyard, counting the days with her fingers. Although her face was much paler than before, it was still somewhat healthy. Son-in-law had sent a letter a few days ago, saying that he had an urgent matter to attend to in a faraway place and would only be back after a very long time. How long was a very long time? A month? Or 2 months? She was actually very happy that Miss was pregnant, but the son-in-law was not around, And even the second miss had disappeared for almost 10 days. She just could not be happy. Hearing the voice behind her, she looked back and immediately stood up. She hurriedly ran over and said, "Miss, don't move. Let me do it." There was a lot of space inside the carriage, and it was covered with a thick brocade couch. However, it was still a little bumpy on the official road. These people seemed to be in a hurry. Except for the first night when the river was congested, they had to stop for a short while. After that, they hurried on day and night. Apart from Taoist nun, there were dozens of people accompanying them. Without exception, all of them were masters. Li Yi had seen 2 of them in purple at the Hero Conference. They were all masters in the heaven list. The other people in blue also gave off an extraordinary feeling. Not counting the Taoist nun, this kind of strength in the Zhonghu could be considered as a not insignificant force. Taoist nun gave him a very strange feeling. Apart from a few words in the beginning, she had not taken the initiative to speak again. She did not even mention the method of making colored glaze. However, as for the various requests that Kiran made to test Kiran and even his rude and excessive actions, Kiran agreed to all of them without hesitation. The more she acted like this, the more he felt that she was plotting something big. He took out a painting scroll from his sleeve. This was the one he had obtained from the man in blue. After slowly unfolding it, he saw the woman in the painting. A look of confusion appeared on his face. "I don't think so." After a long time, he shook his head and dispelled an unrealistic thought from his mind. "Holy religion." Li Yi leaned against the carriage and slowly said a few words. "Good stuff." In another carriage ahead, a middle-aged Taoist nun sat cross-legged with a thin book in her hand. In the 6th month of the first year of Jinghe, Qing and Prefecture, Li family village. On the 7th day of the 7th month, immortal at the Magpie Bridge, the unknown scholar's name shook Qing and Prefecture. On the 15th day of the 8th month, Shui Diao Getu, he was awarded the title of #1 scholar of the Jing Kingdom. Candied haws, rui nectar, strong wine, scented soap, perfume. Master of heavenly punishment, changed interrogation by torture, innovated mathematics, turned the tide, defeated the envoy of the Qi Kingdom. After a while, the Taoist nun put the book to one side and said, "Invite that guest over." "Yes, madam." Immediately, one of the men turned his horse around and rode to the front of another carriage. He said to the people standing guard outside, "Her ladyship has orders to invite this guest over." "Shoo." One of the men made a shushing gesture and said, "Keep your voice down." "He fell asleep again?" The man's face showed an expression of disbelief. The others nodded helplessly. "Forget it. I'll go report to her ladyship." The man shook his head helplessly, turned his horse around again and rode forward. He had seen people who liked to sleep, but this was the first time he had seen someone who slept during the day and slept at night, only waking up for meals. No wonder her ladyship treated him so specially. After all, there weren't many people in this world who liked to sleep so much. Then let's wait for him to wake up. After reporting the truth, there was a pause before a voice came from inside the carriage. It was already late at night in the capital. There was less than an hour left until the curfew. There were almost no pedestrians on the streets. 2 slightly tired figures walked out of a brothel. A few steps behind them, several figures followed closely behind. Wan Ruoqing turned her head and asked, "Zumo, are you really going to the Zheng family tomorrow?" Zumo nodded and said, "I want to go there and bring back my parents' memorial tablets." Wan Ruoqing thought about it and said, "I'll go with you." Zumo shook her head. "No need. It's not a dangerous place. I'll be fine alone." "All right, I'll wait for you outside the Zheng family tomorrow." Wan Ruoqing nodded and then sighed. "I wonder how he is. There hasn't been any news from the brothel for a long time." Zumo raised her head, and a trace of deep regret appeared on her face. If she hadn't asked Xiao Chui to lie to him that day, if she had asked him to stay for just a quarter of an hour, would that incident not have happened? Suddenly, an explosive shout came from behind them. The 8 people immediately rushed forward and surrounded Wan Ruoqing and Zhang Zumo with their backs to the outside. One of them even unsheathed his weapon and revealed a vigilant expression as he pointed to a distant alley on the side. One person looked into the darkness and said coldly, "Stop hiding and come out." Only the man's words echoed in the dark alley. There was still no sound. Chapter 644. You four, escort the two girls and leave. We'll take care of this. The leader turned around and ordered. Suddenly, a xiao sound came from the air. He staggered and covered his shoulder. He immediately said, "There are archers on the other side, quickly dodge." Swoosh! Swoosh! However, his warning was a little too late. After a few sounds, 3 more people were shot. Fortunately, the wounds were not fatal. Their expressions changed. One of them immediately took out a bamboo tube and lit it without hesitation. A dazzling white light suddenly lit up from his hand and exploded in the night sky. "Move quickly. Catch the 2 women. Kill the others." A low voice finally came from the depths of the alley, and more than 10 people walked out from it. In the deepest part of the alley, a masked young man smiled coldly. "Did you go out with them again yesterday?" Zhang Shichen asked his son as soon as the banquet ended. Zhang Zijian nodded and said, "Yes, I just went out for dinner." "Don't hang out with them in the future." Zhang Shichen frowned and said, "When the king of Shu gains power in the future, he can get you an official position in the court. Keep your spirits up. Don't hang out with those people all day and give up on yourself." "I know." Zhang Zijian nodded and said. Not long after, Zhang Zijian looked at his father's back with a trace of sarcasm on his face. Ever since he broke a leg and almost died, Li Jianren's temperament had changed drastically. Even the few people who were close to him had gradually distanced themselves from him. This time, after Li Yi disappeared, he had said many times that he wanted to take revenge for the humiliation he had suffered in the past. He knew that the 2 women were protected by experts, and this was not a small matter at all. He had made ample preparations. He had even gone there personally to witness that scene with his own eyes. Now, he had probably succeeded, right? Xing Zumo? In the entire Xing family, only his father thought so. Zhang Zijian's mouth twitched, and he got up to walk to his room. He would get news of Li Jianren by tomorrow night at the latest. Dazzling fireworks exploded in the night sky. Within a few breaths, the nearest brothels were quickly lit up. However, it was too late. The arrow is poisoned. The 4 people who were shot were lying on the ground, their faces pale. The other 4 were protecting the 2 women behind them. When they saw the dozen people walking out of the alley, their faces turned ugly. "Who are you people?" the leader of the group asked coldly. "Don't let him stall for time," the leader of the opposing side said calmly. "Kill." He didn't expect the other party to be so decisive. The man's face completely darkened as he said, "Ladies, we can only hold them off for a while. You 2 run quickly to the nearest brothel." After saying that, he took the lead and rushed forward. The signal had already been sent. As long as they could buy some time for reinforcements to arrive, these people would no longer be a threat. The other 3 glanced at each other before pouncing forward one after another. Although Wan Ruoqing and Zhang Zumo looked anxious, they also knew that the 2 of them would only be a burden here. They quickly turned around and ran back. How could the opposing side let the 2 of them go? Immediately, 4 people quickly chased after them. The few men were entangled and could only watch helplessly as they passed by them. "Let's see where you can run to." The 4 people walked side by side. When they passed a certain street corner, a sneer appeared on their faces. However, at this street corner, a blade suddenly flashed, and 4 heads rolled to the ground. "Disrespecting the queen, you deserve to die." A figure walked out from behind with a bloody long blade in his hand and said coldly. More and more figures walked out from behind him and turned their heads at the same time, looking at the deep alley not far ahead. Why haven't they come back yet? Seeing that the 4 people who were not afraid of death actually stopped everyone, and there was still no news of the 4 people who had just left, the leader finally frowned. The 4 of them all had extraordinary skills, but it took them such a long time to deal with 2 weak women. If they delayed any longer, the situation might change. The man was about to open his mouth to adjust his plan, but at some point, he saw many figures rushing over from the opposite side. His expression finally changed. "They're finally here." The eyes of the 4 big men lit up, and they no longer continued to fight. They quickly retreated to the back and said to the figures, "These brothers are injured. We'll take them to find a doctor first. I'll leave this to you." After saying that, they quickly carried the 4 people on the ground and went to the nearest clinic. "Ladies, there's nothing here?" After a while, a man held a torch in his hand and looked around. Except for the blood on the ground, there was no one at all. It was clearly here just now. They just told us to go first. Wan Ruoqing walked over, and after looking around, her face showed an anxious expression. It's impossible. The man also looked puzzled. At this moment, a man covered in blood ran over from afar and asked, "It's all thanks to you. Are the two ladies all right? Where are the others?" Wan Ruoqing hurriedly walked over and asked, "How are your injuries?" "They're all in the clinic in front." Seeing that the two of them were safe, the man let out a long sigh of relief and said, "They're all superficial wounds, it's not a big deal. Just now, thanks to these brothers who arrived in time, otherwise, I might really lose my life here today." "Which brothers?" The man opposite asked with a puzzled expression. "What happened just now? Weren't you the ones who rushed over just now?" The man asked with a puzzled expression. "Not far from here, in a hidden courtyard." "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" More than 10 people were tied up and kneeling in the courtyard. A young man pulled the black cloth off one of their faces and asked slowly. The man sneered, clenched his teeth and said, "Don't even think about it, I advise you." With a flash of saber light, a head flew up and rolled not far away. The headless corpse fell to the ground. The young man walked down to the next one. "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" Seeing his companion's head separated from his body, the man's complexion changed. He said, "You had better not." With another flash of saber light, the young man walked in front of the third person. "Tell me, who ordered you to do this?" The black-clothed man pointed at the last person and said with a trembling voice, It was Li. It was young Master Li Jianren. I beg you, don't kill me. Disrespecting the Heavenly Empress, you all deserve to die." The young man took a step back and waved his hand. In an instant, several saber lights appeared in the courtyard. The young man walked to the last black-clothed man in the courtyard and slowly said, "Now, it's your turn." The figure's body was already trembling like a sieve. He said, You dare kill me? My father is the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works. You can't kill me." "Young Master, Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, I've offended you." The young man looked at him without any emotion in his eyes. In the next moment, there was the sound of a saber cutting into flesh. Li Jianren's eyes suddenly widened and then he did not close them again. Chapter 645. The time when Zhang Zijian saw Li Jianren again was not as early as he had expected. Because Li Jianren was missing. As a famous playboy in the capital city, it was not a big deal for him not to go home at night. He often stayed in brothels at night and enjoyed himself all night. It was common for him to go home at noon or in the afternoon the next day. Especially after Li Jianren broke his leg and almost died, he completely abandoned himself to despair. It was not unusual for him not to go home for several days in a row. It seemed that the Li family had completely given up on him and began to support another direct descendant of the Li family, who had not been valued so much before. However, all the playboys, including Zhang Zijian, understood that Li Jianren did not go to seek pleasure last night. More than 10 assassins dealing with 2 weak women should have been a simple matter. However, until noon the next day, not only was there no news from those people, even Li Jianren had disappeared without a trace. This matter was a little unusual. Something is wrong. Did something happen to him? What could possibly happen to so many people? Could it be that those 2 women managed to kill all of them without making a sound? In a restaurant, several playboys looked uncertain. Zhang Zijian said with a sullen face, "Let's go to the Li family." In the hall of the county government, County Magistrate Lu's face was not very good. Early in the morning, someone reported that they were besieged by a group of people who suddenly appeared in an alley last night. Those people even used bows and arrows. 4 of them were injured and were still lying in the clinic. The capital city was under the rule of the emperor, so the public security was naturally the best in the whole Jing kingdom. Although some crimes could not be avoided, it was the first time for him to be intercepted and killed on the road since he took office. More importantly, the case involved 2 important people, so he had to treat it carefully. Seeing a constable coming in from outside, County Magistrate Lu stood up and asked, "Have you found anything?" The bailiff cupped his hands and said, "Sir, we are already following the traces of blood left at the scene. I believe we will have results very soon." County Magistrate Lu frowned. This case was also strange. According to those men, they were almost unable to hold on last night, but a group of people suddenly appeared and saved them. At that time, they were in a hurry to treat their companions. When they came back later, they found that the group of villains and the reinforcements had disappeared at the same time. What was even more bizarre was that they didn't know who had saved them. Two groups of people suddenly appeared and disappeared. This was the first time he had encountered such a strange case in his many years as an official. A bailiff came over and reported, "Darren, the servants of Assistant Minister Lee's family have come to report that their young master has gone missing." "Which Assistant Minister Lee?" County Magistrate Liu raised his head and asked. The bailiff replied, "Assistant Minister Lee of the Ministry of Works." "How long has he been missing?" 12 hours. County Magistrate Liu waved his hand and said, "Let them search all the major brothels in the capital first. If they can't find him in 72 hours, then come back to report." 12 hours was nothing for the group of playboys in the capital. There was once a playboy among playboys who stayed in a brothel for 7 days and 7 nights. He set a record that still hadn't been broken. County Magistrate Liu said impatiently and said to another bailiff, "Let's go and see how their investigation is going." He had just walked out of the county office with a few bailiffs and bailiffs when a bailiff ran over in a hurry. When he raised his head and saw County Magistrate Liu, he said with a pale face, "Sir, something big has happened." County Magistrate Liu's heart skipped a beat when he saw the extremely frightened expression on his face. His heart gradually sank. "Sir, it's just up ahead." With the bailiff in the lead, County Magistrate Liu led a group of bailiffs and bailiffs through streets and alleys. Finally, they arrived in front of a house deep in the alley. The bailiff's face was pale. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Sir, we followed the traces all the way and finally found this place." County Magistrate Liu looked at him and asked, "Are the murderers here?" "They are all inside." The bailiff nodded and said. County Magistrate Liu nodded with satisfaction. Recently, he was more and more satisfied with the work of the bailiffs in the county office. 15 murderers, without exception, were all beheaded. One of them was pierced through the heart by a sword. It seems to be Li Jianren, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works. The bailiff added. "Who did you say?" County Magistrate Liu suddenly turned his head and asked with shock in his eyes. The bailiff said with a pale face, "Sir, before you go in, you must be mentally prepared." County Magistrate Liu's face changed greatly. He turned his head and strode in, followed by several bailiffs and bailiffs. EW. The next moment, a chorus of sounds came from the courtyard. Not long after, County Magistrate Liu walked out of the courtyard with the help of 2 bailiffs. He held onto the wall to steady himself. "The few of you stay here and protect the scene." Forcing himself to forget about the scene of carnage in the courtyard, he waved his hand and said in a trembling voice, Immediately report to the Ministry of Justice." 16 people had died, and 15 people had their heads chopped off. Looking at their clothes, it should be what the man had said. They were undoubtedly the people who had ambushed them last night. However, he didn't expect that these people, who were supposed to be murderers, would all die a violent death. Although the pool of blood in the courtyard had solidified, the pungent smell and the cruel scene still attacked all his senses. More importantly, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was among the dead. Previously, the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights had been poisoned to death, which had enraged His Majesty and almost turned the entire capital city upside down. This time, even the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works had been killed, and more than 10 other people had died. This was the most serious case that had happened in the capital city in recent years. Moreover, the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Works had led a group of killers to kill 2 women. This was another big case. It should be noted that there was still no conclusion to the murder of the son of the Vice Minister of the Ministry of Rights, the framing of Miss Zhang, and the night attack by the men of sacrifice. No matter how he looked at it, this matter was not something he could be involved in. It could be predicted that there would be a reign of terror in the imperial court this time. He sent bailiffs to report this matter everywhere. When he walked back to the county office, his legs were still a little weak. He had just sat down when someone suddenly came to report that Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works had come to visit. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works was only half a rank higher than him. As the magistrate of the capital city, he didn't need to be too humble. However, at this moment, His expression was quite complicated because he didn't know how to tell the news to the assistant minister. The bailiffs had just been sent out by him and shouldn't have arrived at the Li family yet, which meant that Assistant Minister Li didn't know that his son and he were already in two different worlds. Lord Lu. The middle-aged man came over and saluted him. With a complicated expression, Magistrate Lu returned the salute and said, "Lord Li, my son didn't return last night. I was really worried that something had happened to him. I'm afraid I'll have to trouble Lord Lu this time." The middle-aged man looked at the unfamiliar magistrate of the capital city. At this moment, he had already learned what had happened from Zhang Zijian and others, so he was worried. Naturally, he wouldn't think that his son didn't return last night because he was seeking pleasure in a brothel. After learning that Lord Lu didn't attach much importance to this matter, he hurried over immediately. Magistrate Lu sighed and said, "To tell you the truth, Lord Li, we've found your son." "Where is he?" The middle-aged man's face lit up. Chapter 646. In a courtyard deep in a street in the capital city. Jianren. Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was pale and bloodless. He slowly squatted down and touched Li Jianren's cold body. There was a long sword in the young man's chest. His eyes were wide open, and his mouth was open. One could vaguely see the fear in his eyes. His body was already cold. The middle-aged man reached out his hand and closed his eyelids. He slowly stood up, closed his eyes and said, "Lord Lu, who killed my son?" County Magistrate Lu sighed and said, "The Ministry of Justice has already sent someone to deal with this case. Lord Li, please restrain your grief." The middle-aged man opened his eyes and said, "Bring Jianren back." Several guards of the Li family came forward and covered Li Jianren's body with a white cloth. A supervisor of the Ministry of Justice frowned and was about to step forward when he was stopped by a young man beside him. "It's okay." "Yes, Assistant Minister Lu." The supervisor of the Ministry of Justice took a step back and said respectfully. The middle-aged man and several guards of the Li family left with Li Jianren's body. From beginning to end, they didn't say a word. 1. County Magistrate Lu looked at the young man beside him and opened his mouth. Only then did he realize that the person in front of him was no longer a constable under him, but an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. In terms of official rank, he was even higher than him. He changed his words and said, "Assistant Minister Lu, I'll leave this case to you. I'll ask them to hand over the file to the Ministry of Justice later. I'll leave this case to you." "Lord Lu, you're too polite." Lu Yi smiled and cupped his hands. County Magistrate Lu nodded and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, he seemed to think of something and turned his head again. He said, "This case involves the two girls. Lord Li is not here." The son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works attacked the two girls at night with more than 10 killers. Later, they were all killed by an unknown force. Lu Yi said slowly, "A few months ago, someone poisoned the son of the Minister-Counselor of the Ministry of Rights and tried to frame Lady Zuamo. Then, a large number of men of sacrifice attacked Willow Alley at night. I think these things may be related. I also think it's a little strange." County Magistrate Lu nodded and walked out of the door. "Speak." Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works had a calm expression as he slowly spat out a word. Zhang Zijian, Chen Lisan, and the others stood in place, their faces pale. They looked at the corpse covered in white cloth, and their bodies trembled. Zhang Zijian swallowed his saliva and said, "Uncle Li, speak." The middle-aged man said expressionlessly, "Where did Jianren go last night?" He was suspicious of what they had said before. If it was just two commoner girls, how could things have turned out like this? The middle-aged man looked down and closed his eyes in pain. Li Yi went missing, and Jianren said he wanted to take revenge. Chen Lisan lowered his head, gritted his teeth and said, He brought people to cause trouble for Li Yi's two lovers." "What are the names of those two women?" the middle-aged man asked in a low voice. "Zheng Zumo, Wan Ruoqing," Chen Lisan said immediately. The middle-aged man repeated the two names a few times, then turned around and walked out of the door without looking at the playboys again. Li Jianren was dead. Li Jianren was actually dead. Zhang Zijian still couldn't accept this reality when he walked out of the door of the Li mansion. There was no suspense at all. Why did it end up like this? Qin Yu was slapped by Li Yi in public, and King Duanyang was kicked away by Li Yi. The most serious thing was that His Royal Highness King of Shu was beaten up, and they, the popinjays, were beaten by His Majesty. However, Li Jianren's body was just in front of him. Just yesterday, they were still drinking and chatting merrily, talking about how they would take revenge on that person. Why did everything change after he left? It became even more. Zhang Zijian didn't know how he walked back home until he felt a burning pain on his face. He raised his head in disbelief and looked at his father, who was glaring at him. "You bastard!" When Zhang Shichen slapped him a second time, blood was already flowing out of the corner of Zhang Zijian's mouth. However, these two slaps didn't seem to vent Zhang Shichen's anger. He looked around and actually picked up a chair beside him. A middle-aged woman rushed forward and hugged him tightly. She said to Zhang Zijian, "What are you waiting for? Run." Zhang Zijian's expression changed. He immediately flashed back to his room and closed the door from the inside. "Unfilial son, open the door." The assistant minister's face was full of anger. He punched the door, but there was no movement inside. Zhang Zijian leaned against the door with a pale face. After knocking a few times, Zhang Shichen's expression darkened. He took a step back and said, "Someone, lock this door and open it in 3 days. The woman's expression changed and she hurriedly said, "Master, no, 3 days, Zijian will starve to death in 3 days. If he really starves to death, I'll pretend that I never gave birth to this unfilial son." Zhang Shichen put away the key, waved his sleeves, and strode away. The woman stood by the door. After a long time she sighed and said, "Zijian, you are muddle-headed." Inside the room, Zhang Zijian sat by the table. His mouth was dry, but there was not a drop of water in the teapot on the table. He looked ahead with a blank expression. His mind was filled with Li Jianren's pale face. At that time, they stopped those people. Drunken Ink and I went back to the brothel to get help. I vaguely remember that someone chased after us, but I don't know why they didn't catch up. Wan Ruoqing described the situation last night. Lu Yi recorded it on the side. Wan Ruoqing looked at him and asked, "Who saved us? What happened to those bad people?" Lu Yi put down his pen, smiled and said, "We are still investigating." Wan Ruoqing thought about it and said, "Do I need to go with you to the yamen?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "No, don't worry. I will definitely investigate this matter. However, I will have to trouble you these days. Just stay in this yard and don't go out easily." Wan Ruoqing nodded. "Ladies, I will take my leave." Lu Yi stood up, cupped his hands, and walked out the door. When he looked up, he saw the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works coming over with a group of people. Lu Yi stood where he was and asked, "I wonder why Lord Li has come here? I suspect that my son's death has something to do with the 2 women living here. I didn't expect Lord Lu to be 1 step faster." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Works stood opposite Lu Yi and said, "Those 2 women must have been escorted back to the Ministry of Justice's yamen, right?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "I have already investigated. There is something hidden in this case, and it has nothing to do with these 2 women. I'm afraid Lord Li has suspected wrongly this time. This is a serious matter. We can't let go of anyone suspicious." The middle-aged man stared at Lu Yi and said through gritted teeth, "Lord Lu, don't bend the law for personal gain. I will not let go of a bad person, nor will I wrongly accuse a good person. As for how to solve this case, Lord Li doesn't need to worry about it." Lu Yi walked past him and said to the people guarding to the side, "Go to the Secret Intelligence Office and bring a team here to protect these 2 women. They are important witnesses and cannot be lost. If anyone tries to force their way in and take them, kill them on the spot." "Yes." Although Lu Yi was temporarily the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, he was still a member of the Secret Intelligence Office and still had the authority to mobilize the power of the Secret Intelligence Office. The people immediately nodded. "Lord, what should we do?" Someone beside the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works asked with a slightly changed expression. The middle-aged man's face was as dark as still water. He turned around and squeezed out a word from between his teeth. "Go!" Chapter 647. There were many things happening in the capital these days. There were always some unimaginable things happening under the feet of the emperor. The disappearance of the Count of Chong and Li Yi had not completely passed. The death of the son of the assistant minister of works was like throwing a boulder into a calm lake. once again setting off monstrous waves. There was a lot of discussion among the people. This was not the first time something like this had happened. It had not been long since the son of the Assistant Minister of Rights had been poisoned to death. Now, an even more famous playboy with a higher status in the capital had disappeared from the public sight forever. This made the ordinary people feel very unsafe. This was the capital. Even the lives of the family members of powerful officials could not be guaranteed. Wouldn't it be even more dangerous for ordinary people like them? When he went out to buy groceries, he had to worry about being hacked to death. When he went to a restaurant to eat, he had to wonder if the food would be poisoned. When he went to a brothel to have fun, he had to worry that the prostitute would stab him when he was at his most carefree. The people lost their sense of security and naturally became resentful. There were many more complaints and worries in the streets and alleys, as well as in the brothels. The following matters were left to the imperial censors, who were in disguise and hiding in every corner. In less than half a day, the imperial censors piled up on the emperor's desk like snowflakes. In the court, all the officials were silent. Emperor Jing sat on the dragon throne and said nothing. The atmosphere was extremely oppressive. An imperial censor walked out and said, "Your Majesty, those criminals are so crazy. This case has already had a great impact in the capital. If it is not eliminated in time, I'm afraid there will be unrest among the people. Yes, if this case is not strictly investigated, I'm afraid they will be even more presumptuous in the future. What face does the government have under the emperor's feet?" Everyone knew that the emperor was not in a good mood recently. At this time, only a few imperial censors dared to speak. "Louis, have you found out who did this case?" After some time, Emperor Jing's voice came slowly. Lu Yi, dressed in official robes, stood out from the crowd. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, this case has just been handed over to the Ministry of Justice. I have already sent people to investigate." "Investigate?" A voice came from behind Lu Yi. Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works walked out and said, "The criminal who killed my son is clearly related to those two women, but Assistant Minister Lu turns a blind eye to them. Is this the strict investigation that Assistant Minister Lu spoke of?" The Assistant Minister of Works had just lost his son. It could be said that he was in an extremely tragic state. The moment he spoke, Lu Yi immediately became the center of attention in the hall. "What two women? What's going on?" Emperor Jing frowned and asked, "Your Majesty, my son had a conflict with two women last night and didn't return for the entire night. He died this morning." The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works said in a sorrowful voice. Assistant Minister Lu clearly knows that those two women are the key to this case, yet he ignores them. "I cannot help but suspect." After a moment of silence in the hall, there was an uproar. They had all heard of Lu Yi's name. He was an expert in solving cases and could be said to be a genius in investigating and interrogating cases. He was highly regarded by His Majesty. In just over a year, he was promoted from a small constable to the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice. Everything he had today was given to him by His Majesty, and His Majesty could take these things back at any time. If Lu Yi protected someone he shouldn't have in such a serious case, not only His Majesty, but many of the court officials present would not let him go. After all, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works was dead. Who could guarantee that the next person to die would not be someone from their family? There's such a thing? The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice protected the suspect who killed the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works. This Lu Yi is too bold. This case is of great importance. Is it something that an Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice can meddle in? The Minister of Justice looked at Lu Yi with an anxious expression and said, "What exactly happened? Why haven't you reported it to His Majesty?" The court was in an uproar because of the words of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works. At this moment, another figure stood up and said, "May I ask Assistant Minister Li why your son brought more than 10 assassins to kill two weak women last night?" As soon as this was said, the uproar in the court lessened slightly. The expression of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works changed slightly. More than 10 people were beheaded, and his son had died. This was the most important thing in this case. As for the other things, they were not so important. No one bothered to investigate the matter of the two women. Compared to his son, the two women were insignificant. They had to die. Whether or not Jianren's death had anything to do with them, they had to die. When he turned to look at the person who spoke, his expression changed again. Zhang Shichen, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, Zhang Shichen. Both of them belonged to the King of Shu's faction and were core figures. Although they were not close friends, they had some friendship. He would not be surprised if it was anyone else who said that. Why did it have to be him? I only know that my son's body is now in the Li family. The two women who are related to this case are fine. I only want to seek justice for my dead son. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works lowered his head and said. He looked around. In the court, several figures stood up. What interception? Emperor Jing asked in a deep voice. Your Majesty, I was about to report this to you. Lu Yidong raised his hands in a salute and said, last night, around 11 o'clock, Li Zhenren, the son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works, led a dozen or so assassins to surround and kill two women in a dark alley in Jingdo. 4 of the guards protecting the two women were injured. Later, they were rescued by a group of mysterious people. When they returned to the scene, the group of mysterious people, Assistant Minister Li, and 15 assassins had all disappeared. It was not until this morning that we found the bodies of a total of 16 people, including Li Zhenren, somewhere in the capital. Emperor Jing frowned. The son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works was killed, and the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works surrounded and killed women in the capital. These were two different things. One of the two girls is called Zhang Zimo, Lu Yizhong said. Zhang Zimo. A trace of doubt appeared on Emperor Jing's face. He always felt that he had heard this name somewhere before. Lu Yizhong explained, this Miss Zhang is the one who was framed for the murder of Chen. As soon as Lu Yizhong said this, the courtiers were suddenly stunned. Last time, the son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Rights was poisoned and framed on a woman. The case had not been concluded yet, but it was certain that the person behind the scenes was directly targeting the woman surnamed Zhang. Because of County Uncle Li's protection last time, Lu Yizhong quickly solved the case, and the person's evil plan did not succeed. This time, County Uncle Li had just disappeared, and someone jumped out so impatiently. The matter behind this was a bit thought-provoking. If he thought more deeply, the disappearance of County Uncle Li, was it also? This was the thing that His Majesty cared about the most recently. No matter who was involved in this matter, there would not be any good results. Everyone could not avoid it. Although Li Zhenren was dead, he still caused big trouble for his father. Emperor Jing's face darkened, and he asked, Assistant Minister Li, tell me, what did your son do last night? Assistant Minister Li's face changed. He bowed his head and said, I don't know. Was it you? Emperor Jing suddenly asked. Your Majesty. Assistant Minister Li raised his head with a puzzled expression. County Uncle Li's disappearance. Was it you who did it? Emperor Jing stood up and looked at him. Below, the middle-aged man was stunned, and then he hurriedly knelt down. Your Majesty, I guarantee with my head that the disappearance of County Uncle Chong and Li Yi has nothing to do with me. The son of the Assistant Minister took killers to kill two women. I have a group of good courtiers. Emperor Jing said coldly, Come, take down Assistant Minister Li Yuankai of the Ministry of Works. In addition, the Supreme Court cooperate with the Ministry of Justice to thoroughly investigate whether the disappearance of County Uncle Chong and has anything to do with him, and the mysterious force that appeared last night. Haha, a mysterious force actually appeared under my nose. Investigate all of them. Investigate thoroughly. Today's morning court ended very late, and His Majesty was furious in the court. His Majesty had been furious a lot these days. Almost every day, an official would be dismissed or demoted. This time, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works, whose son had died, not only did he not get His Majesty's sympathy, but he also lost his life. The matter of Li Zhenren, who was already dead, leading people to kill two women would not have much impact on Assistant Minister Li. But this time, what His Majesty wanted to investigate was obviously not just this matter. Today, all the officials who came out of the court understood one thing. The Li family was finished. Chapter 648. Compared to the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Appointments, one of the 6 ministries, the Ministry of Works, did not seem as important. However, the fact that an assistant minister had been brought to the Ministry of Justice for investigation was still a considerable disturbance to the entire court. Although they didn't know what the result would be, based on the current situation, Assistant Minister Li was most likely dead. The results of the Ministry of Justice or the Secret Intelligence Bureau's investigations were always the results that the emperor wanted. If they investigated meticulously, there was not a single person in the court who did not have a guilty conscience. The other officials were fine, but although the emperor had changed greatly these days, even his temperament had become more ruthless and he was not as magnanimous and tolerant toward the mistakes of the court officials as before. There was only a certain limit. This time, Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Works had exceeded that limit. However, for some other officials, the 2 to 3 years of good times were truly unlucky. The officials in the faction were all suffering. Now, it was already the turn of a fourth-rank official. Even the king of Shu had been banished from the capital. Prime Minister Qin rarely spoke up in court. In just over a year, the advantage that he had gained over the past few decades had become negligible. The emperor's health was getting worse, but he had banished the king of Shu and suppressed the officials in the king's faction. Could it be that the emperor was so disappointed in him that he had other plans? These guesses and suspicions began to surface in the minds of more and more people and could not be dispelled. Why are there always so many idiots in this world? In a brothel somewhere in the capital, Qin Yu sipped a cup of wine and shook his head as he held a plump woman in his arms. Chen Li Jun sighed and said, "The Li family is finished." The assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice personally led people to search their house today. Li Jianren's funeral has just been organized. I'm afraid they will have to do it again. This time, the Li family that the assistant minister of the Ministry of Works belonged to would be completely erased from the list of influential officials in the capital. Li Jianren was dead. His death was not without meaning. At the very least, he had dragged the entire Li family with him to be buried with him. Chen Li Jun raised his head and glanced around. In the entire capital, few people could compare to Qin Yu's hatred for Li Yi. However, even he could only endure and not do anything. Who gave those idiots the confidence? Clang! Cui Chengyu threw something on the table, making a crisp sound. He looked at the plump woman in Qin Yu's arms and said, "You go out first." "Thank you, young master." Seeing the sparkling and translucent bracelet on the table, the woman's eyes widened. She grabbed it and hid it in her sleeve, saying, "Thank you, young master. Thank you, young master. This humble woman will leave right away." After the woman left, Qin Yu looked at Cui Chengyu with some surprise and asked, "When did you become so generous, giving out glass bracelets so casually?" "They're all worthless things." Cui Chengyu shook his head and said, "I have something to ask you." Qin Yu sighed and said, "The Cui family is really a big family. I can't compare. Cui Chengyu looked at him and asked seriously, "What is Prime Minister Qin thinking?" Qin Yu glanced at him and asked, "Is the one talking to me Cui Chengyu or the eldest young master of the Cui family?" "Young Duke Qin." Cui Chengyu stood up, cupped his hands, and asked, "I need to know the attitude of your Qin family." At this moment, he represented the Cui family. After being rejected several times in the Qin family's mansion, the Cui family was eager to know the true attitude of Prime Minister Qin and the civil officials under him. Qin Yu glanced at him, waved his hand and said, "Sit down and talk." Not long after, in a tea house opposite a brothel, a man sitting by the window saw several young people coming out of the brothel, turned around, and went downstairs. Several performers invited by the tea house were performing on a temporary stage, and the seats below were full of guests. The man walked to a place and whispered to a middle-aged man sitting there, "Fifth master, they're coming out." Watching opera in a tea house is different from a brothel. "It's boring, let's go." The middle-aged man stood up and shook his head. The two walked out of the tea house and went straight to the opposite tea house. Ministry of Justice Prison. The former assistant minister of the Ministry of Works sat in front of a table. This cell was unusually clean, without a trace of strange smell. The food on the table in front of him was fragrant, and there was no lack of good wine and delicacies. He poured himself a cup of wine and leisurely enjoyed his meal. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, he slowly wiped his mouth with a clean handkerchief, looked at the young man opposite him and said, "Lord Lu, you have good methods." Lu Yizhong looked at him and said, "Is there anything else that Lord Li wants to eat? I'll tell them to buy it." The desire for good food is not worth mentioning. The assistant minister waved his hand and said, "I thought there would never be such a day. Heaven's plan is not as good as man's plan. I admire Lord Lu. If you don't want people to know, don't do it." Lu Yizhong shook his head and said, "If you knew it would be like this, why did you do it in the first place?" The middle-aged man opposite him smiled and said, "People in the court can't do what they want. Lord Liu is still young. You will understand in the future. In this court, who dares to say that he is clean both in front and behind him?" Lu Yizhong looked at him and asked, "So you're saying that Lord Li plans on shouldering these matters alone? Don't tell me you don't know what the consequences of adding up these crimes will be?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "Let this matter end here. Otherwise, it will be a disaster for Lord Liu and not a blessing." After a pause, he raised his head to look at Lu Yizhong and said, "I do not seek to be dishonorable. I only hope that Lord Liu will be lenient and leave some descendants for my Li family. I will be extremely grateful." Lu Yizhong nodded and said, "Beyond the law, there is reason. Lord Li's request is not excessive." The middle-aged man stood up and bowed to him. "Thank you, Lord Liu." Lu Yizhong nodded and said, "However, before this, I have a question." "Lord Liu, please speak." Lu Yizhong looked at him and said word by word, "How much does Lord Li know about the matter at the Palace of Eternal Peace 20 years ago?" The middle-aged man's expression changed greatly, but he instantly recovered and shook his head. "I do not know what Lord Liu is talking about." Lu Yizhong looked at him and said, "In that case, I will take my leave." After saying this, he turned around and left decisively. "Protect the descendants of my Li family." As he stepped out of the cell, a voice with difficulty came from behind him. Between the lofty mountains and precipitous cliffs, a group of nearly 100 people was slowly moving around a few carriages. In front of one of the carriages, a man in yellow looked back and said, "How long do you think he will sleep today?" "I'll guess 20 hours. Another man in yellow thought for a moment and said, "I'll guess more than 20 hours. There are 24 hours in a day, and it's convenient to eat. I'll bet 1 tael of silver." "I'll bet." Just as the other man finished speaking, the curtain of the carriage was lifted and the young man asked, "Where are we?" A man in yellow immediately said, "In a few more days, we will reach Shu province." The young man nodded, but he did not enter the carriage. Instead, he leaned against the front of the carriage and admired the surrounding scenery. Seeing this, the man in yellow was slightly startled and asked tentatively, You're not going to sleep?" "No." The young man shook his head and said, "It's stuffy in the carriage, so I came out to get some fresh air." The man in yellow counted with his fingers. In another 2 hours, he would have slept for a total of 11 hours in a day, and he would have 1 tael of silver in his hands. However, if he continued to enjoy the scenery, his silver would fly away. He looked at the young man and said in a low voice, "How about you go in and sleep a bit more? I'll help you roll up the curtain and open the window. That way it won't be too stuffy." The young man thought for a moment and nodded. "That's fine." Not long after, another sound of gnashing teeth came from outside the carriage. "Damn it, you're cheating. Spare me, spare me, spare me." On the rugged mountain road, the 10 or so bandits who were extremely fierce just a moment ago were all kneeling on the ground. Their faces were pale and their voices were trembling. "Did you see it or not?" The young woman holding the sword asked coldly. "Yes, yes." A bald bandit hurriedly nodded and said, 2 days ago, there was a group of people like the heroine who passed by here. However, there were too many of them at that time, so we didn't dare to make a move." "Where did they go?" the woman asked coldly. "Shu province." The bald bandit immediately stretched out his hand and pointed in a certain direction. After a long time, there was no sound. He mustered up his courage and looked up. Finally, he let out a sigh of relief and sat down on the ground. That demoness had finally left. After a moment, the bald bandit turned around and gritted his teeth. Who hasn't failed before? The first business failed, but it doesn't matter. I'll come back tomorrow. 1 day later. Senior, 3 days ago, the person you spoke of passed by here 3 days ago and went to Shu province. The bald bandit's face was covered in blood and his body was trembling as he spoke to an old man in front of him. "If I find out that you're lying to me, be careful of your head." The old man glanced at him and instantly disappeared. After a long time, the bald bandit crawled up from the ground, patted the dirt off his body and walked forward in a daze. "Big brother, where are you going?" A few anxious voices came from behind him. The bald bandit wiped his tears and said with a trembling voice, "I want to turn over a new leaf." Chapter 649. Located in the extreme west of the Jing Kingdom, Shu Province was remote and desolate, with only 5 small counties under its jurisdiction. Yong County, located in the southwest of Shu Province, was the last inhabited place in the west of the Jing Kingdom. 50 miles away from Yong County, there was a great river more than 1,000 feet wide. Crossing this river, one would officially enter the territory of the Qi Kingdom. Because it was remote, it was even poorer. The poorer a place was, the more chaotic it was, and the more chaotic it was, the poorer it was. It was an endless cycle with no solution. Therefore, bandits were rampant in Yong County, and the public security was extremely chaotic. Fortunately, they were only small groups of roving bandits, who only dared to wreak havoc in the villages around the county, not too close to it. 100 miles to the south was the truly terrifying place. It was the border between the Qi Kingdom, the Jing Kingdom, and the Wu Kingdom. It was an area that the 3 kingdoms did not care about. The mountain range stretched on endlessly, and the bandits and mountain bandits there were even more arrogant than the government. Often, there was no one living within 100 miles, which was truly desolate and uninhabited. Looking from afar, the city walls seemed thick, but the guards at the city gates were all listless and bored. Although this place was considered to be bordering the Qi Kingdom, and the relationship between the Jing Kingdom and the Qi Kingdom had always been tense, the army of the Qi Kingdom would not have to climb over the mountains that stretched for dozens of miles, and then cross the great river to come to this place. The unique geographical advantage did not cause Yong County to suffer from the chaos of war. Because of the existence of the provincial governor's mansion and the King of Shu's mansion, the public security of Yong County was more stable than that of other counties. A few carriages slowly approached from afar, and there were nearly 100 people accompanying them. Most of these people were dressed in blue or yellow, and they seemed to be well organized and disciplined. The soldiers guarding the gate shuddered, and one of them retreated into the gate and shouted from afar, "Stop, who are you?" A figure rushed over from behind, slapped him on the head, and scolded, "You blind bastard! This is an important guest of His Highness. Get out of here!" Behind him, a man in purple hurried forward, walked to the front of the first carriage, and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, Protector has been waiting in the city for a long time." Behind them, a long yawn came from one of the carriages. Then a young voice came from the carriage. "Why did you stop? Is it time to eat?" The yellow-clothed man next to the carriage had an expression of admiration on his face. He had lived for 30 years, but he had never seen someone so fond of sleeping. The admiration in his heart could no longer be described with words. The man in yellow shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's not dinner. We've arrived at Shuzhou, Yongzhou County Government." It could be seen that the county government office had been around for a long time. The outer walls were peeling, and the paint on the gate was almost gone. A bailiff ran into one of the houses in a panic and said anxiously, "Sir, bad news, bad news. Another village has become a bandit." The young man, who was dozing off on the chair, was startled. His eyes opened abruptly, and a look of anger appeared on his face. He casually smashed an inkstone on the table. "Bastard! Didn't I tell you not to disturb me when I'm resting?" "I'm sorry, my lord." The bailiff dodged the inkstone and immediately bowed, saying, "But those villagers have reported it to the county government. The county magistrate has ordered you to investigate the case." Got it, got it. I'll go right away." Jiang Zian stood up from the chair angrily. He was a new jinshi in 1 year, but now he was appointed to be a county magistrate in such a remote place. What was the difference between this and being banished? At the thought of having to deal with those trivial things again, his heart was filled with strong resentment. 2 years ago, because he said something wrong in Prince Ning's mansion, his career was affected. His bright and promising future was gone. Seeing that his peers had a smooth career and left him far behind, he was naturally anxious. It was not easy for him to get close to the King of Shu. Before he had time to rejoice, the King of Shu was expelled from the Jing Kingdom the next day. So he followed the king and became a county magistrate in the most remote place of the Jing Kingdom. County magistrate? Was this what a scholar should do? He dealt with trivial cases all day long. Finally, there was a big case that he could make some achievements in. However, he vomited when he saw the crime scene. He didn't make any achievements. After that, he didn't eat meat for a whole month. He, Jiang Zian, had studied hard for more than 10 years just to suffer here? There weren't even any high-class brothels here. The so-called famous courtesans were all ugly and unsightly. Even in his dreams, he wanted to go back to Qing and prefecture. The girls in the Golden Phoenix Pavilion and Jade's courtyard could only be described as beautiful. Sometimes he really doubted whether the king of Shu was the emperor's biological son. As the eldest son of the emperor, how could his fief be in such a remote place, this time? He was afraid that he had followed the wrong person. Another bailiff came in from outside and said, "My lord, the servants of the king's mansion have sent an invitation. The king of Shu will hold a banquet in the king's mansion tonight," Jiang Zian hurriedly said. "Just say that I will be there on time." In an inn in Yong County, Li Yi took the box from Taoist nun and looked at her and asked, "What is this?" The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at him and said lightly, "Tonight, you will go with me to the king of Shu's mansion. To avoid being recognized, wear this." Li Yi glanced at her and opened the box. He could not help but be slightly startled. He took out the thing in the box and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. It was a mask. It looked not much different from the human skin mask seen on TV. It was very thin and soft to the touch. As if thinking of something, Li Yi quickly threw it into the box and asked, "Is this thing made of human skin?" "No," the Taoist nun bluntly replied before turning around and leaving. Li Yi picked it up again and examined it carefully. It didn't look like human skin, and it didn't smell strange. He didn't know what material it was made of. It was surprising that such an exquisite thing existed in this era. After a while, looking at a blurry shadow in the bronze mirror, Li Yi touched his face, feeling both surprised and amazed. If he observed it carefully in the day, there might be some flaws. But at night, after wearing this thing, there was no trace of Photoshop. He did not know how it was made. After a while, Li Yi carefully took it off and put it away. Then, he looked at the candle on the table and was lost in thought. Along the way, he did not have enough opportunities to leave clues. He was also not sure if Rui and the others could get the news. Outside of Shu State was the Qi Kingdom. Once he stepped into the territory of the Qi Kingdom, it would be more troublesome to get rid of them. But now, this Taoist nun was watching him very closely. She even wanted to bring him to the king of Shu's banquet. There were not many opportunities to escape. Right now, he could only take it one step at a time. In a room on the upper floor of the inn, a young man dressed in a luxurious robe smiled and said to Taoist nun, "Auntie, after this period of contact, I realize that this king of Shu is a complete idiot. I only used a little trick and gained his trust. This person can be put to good use. Although this person is stupid, he has a strong background. Even the Cui family is standing behind him. In the imperial court, he has hundreds to answer his call. When the time comes, with his influence in the imperial court, it will be more convenient for us to do things. We can use him to deal with matters in the open, and in the end, we can be the fisherman who reaps the benefits." The young man's smile was somewhat proud. When he talked about the king of Shu, his face naturally revealed a look of mockery. "I said before, don't get too close to Li." The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at him with a frown and said, "Have you forgotten how the Feng family only has the two of us left? The Feng family and the imperial family of the Jing kingdom are absolutely irreconcilable. Naturally, this hatred will not be forgotten. As long as I am alive, I will make the Li family watch the Jing kingdom fall," the young man said through gritted teeth. Then he said seriously, "However, before that, for the sake of the greater good, it is necessary to endure." Chapter 650. Fate really made fools of people. Li Yi remembered that the first time he got involved with the king of Shu was also in the king of Shu residence. It was the same invitation and the same king's mansion. The only difference was that the first time was in the capital city, and this time it was in Shuzhou. After going around in circles, everything seemed to be back to square one. But in fact, the route had already gone astray. At least the king of Shu had gone astray. He was a noble prince with a powerful background. Instead of being a prince in the capital city and waiting to inherit the throne, he had to go to such a remote and desolate place. Why bother? Li Yi walked downstairs with the Taoist nun. A middle-aged man came out of a room. Seeing him, he was stunned and asked, "Aunt, who is this?" "An important guest." The Taoist nun seemed unwilling to explain too much, so she just said one sentence. The young man looked at Li Yi suspiciously, but did not say anything. He walked to the other side of the Taoist nun. Li Yi touched his cheek. It was stuck quite tightly, so it should not fall out suddenly. Otherwise, he was not sure whether the king of Shu would be scared to the point of having a heart attack or something like that if he showed his true self in front of the king of Shu. Even if he did not, he had to be careful. Li Yi weighed in his heart whether to be taken to the Qi kingdom by the Taoist nun or to show his true self in the king of Shu's territory. He felt that the former was less dangerous. Fortunately, the king of Shu did not know that the reason why he was banished to Shuzhou was that he spared no effort to help him for free. Otherwise, even if the Taoist nun was a grandmaster, she might not be able to stop him. Yong County was not large, and the king's mansion was located in the most prosperous part of the county. Before entering the mansion, the first impression Li Yi had was that it was shabby. It was too shabby. He had been to two mansions, Prince Ning's mansion in Qing and Prefecture and the King of Shu's mansion in the capital city. He had been to countless palaces in the Imperial Palace, but the King of Shu's mansion in Yong County was indeed the shabbiest one he had ever seen. Based on this, it could be inferred that the King of Shu's life here should not be very comfortable. Li Yi's guess was right. The King of Shu was indeed not living a comfortable life. Anyone who was banished from the capital, the center of power, to this place would not be in a good mood. Not only was it remote, it was also impoverished. Even though he was known as the King of Shu, he had never thought that he would one day come to this place. Why are you dilly-dallying? Have you not eaten yet? The King of Shu walked out of a spacious room and pointed at the maids and servants who were in a hurry. He frowned and said, "I's banquet is about to begin. If you delay, be careful of your heads." There was nothing good about Shu. The place was not good, and the people were not good. Even the servants in the manor were not as easy to order around as they were in Jingdo. The King of Shu had never hated the word Shu as much as he did now. A figure walked over from afar with a face full of smiles. He first cupped his hands and bowed to the King of Shu before saying, "Your Highness, there's good news from the capital." A look of joy appeared on the King of Shu's face. He immediately asked, "What news? Did Father summon me back to the capital?" The man revealed an awkward expression and said, "No, Your Highness." The King of Shu's expression became a little ugly. He asked, "What's the good news?" The man said embarrassedly, "Your Highness, Li Yi, the County Earl of Chang'an, has been missing for nearly a month. I'm afraid he's dead." Hearing a certain name, the King of Shu's spirit was lifted. He asked, "Who are you talking about?" The man immediately said, "Li Yi, the County Earl of Chang'an Li Yi." "Li Yi is missing?" The King of Shu asked in surprise. "Yes, this news just came from the imperial court. It should be true." The man was the chief clerk of the King of Shu's mansion. At this moment, as soon as he received the letter from the imperial court, he immediately came to report. "Is he dead?" The King of Shu asked expectantly. The man was stunned and said, "There's no specific news yet. The imperial court said that County Earl Li was kidnapped by bandits. He went all the way to the west and may pass by Shu State. They asked the local officials to pay attention to this matter. If they find any trace of County Earl Li, they must find a way to rescue him." "Rescue him? County Earl Li is the pillar of our Jing kingdom. We must find a way to rescue him." The King of Shu sneered and said, "Send someone to the provincial governor's mansion and then to the government offices of all counties. If there's any news of Li Yi, they must report to I immediately." "Yes." The man bowed and quickly retreated. "Li Yi." A cold smile appeared on the King of Shu's face. He said, "You'd better pray to God that he won't fall into my hands this time." It was getting late, and guests began to arrive gradually. Although Shuzhou was the King of Shu's fief, it was the local gentry and aristocrats who held firm control over Shuzhou. Even though the Cui family had been operating here for a long time, they were not legitimate. After the King of Shu arrived in Shuzhou, he frequently held such banquets. Most of the guests were the local gentry. If he could gain the support of these people, he would be able to firmly control Shuzhou and have nothing to worry about in the future. "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Your Highness." Tonight, there were local officials, but most of them were young talents who were somewhat famous in Shu State. They represented the various forces behind them. The King of Shu glanced at them and estimated the number of people. He was generally satisfied. Greetings, Your Highness. A voice came from not far away. The king of Shu turned his head and smiled. He walked over and said, "Why are you so late? I have been waiting for you for a long time." The king of Shu was very grateful to this man surnamed Fong. On one of his trips, he happened to encounter a group of bandits in the city. If not for the young man in front of him, he would have been dead. Of course, the reason why the king of Shu was so polite to him was because other than saving his life, the other party also held a mysterious power. Although he had not seen the whole picture, the tip of the iceberg that was revealed made him very fearful. However, if this power could be of help to him in the future, it would be an extremely good thing. The king of Shu looked at the Taoist nun beside the man surnamed Fong and was surprised for a moment. He immediately asked, "This Taoist priest, is she the one you often mention?" "Yes," the man surnamed Fong said with a smile. The king of Shu's expression turned serious. He cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Taoist priest." "You're welcome, Your Highness." Taoist nun nodded slightly. "Please take a seat." The king of Shu smiled and pointed to a seat that was very close to the front. "Let's go over." The man surnamed Fong led Li Yi and Taoist nun over. "Wait a minute." Li Yi turned around. He had just taken 2 steps when the king of Shu's voice suddenly came from behind. "Your Highness, is there anything else?" When the king of Shu saw the young man beside the Taoist nun turn around, a trace of suspicion appeared on his face. He asked, "You look very familiar. Have we met before?" The young man smiled and said, "When I was in the capital, I only saw Your Highness from afar a few times. I'm afraid Your Highness has mistaken me for someone else." The king of Shu frowned slightly. The voice was unfamiliar, and so was the appearance. But why did he feel an inexplicable sense of familiarity? What was even more strange was that he felt an inexplicable sense of disgust just by looking at this face. "Forget it, it's fine. I mistook you for someone else." A moment later, a trace of doubt appeared on the king of Shu's face. He shook his head and turned to leave. The middle-aged Taoist nun glanced at Li Yi and sat down on the seat of honor. Li Yi sighed in his heart. How did the saying go again? The ones who know you best are not your friends, but your enemies. This saying was really King reasonable. Soon, singers and dancers walked out from the surroundings. They performed to their heart's content accompanied by the night lights. Li Yi picked up his wine glass and took a sip. However, he was not in the mood to appreciate it. He leaned back in his chair and put his arm behind his head as a pillow. He looked at the night sky filled with stars. At the same time, in Shuzhou City, a day of performances had ended. In a brothel that had just closed, a few men stood in a row and bowed. "Greetings, Alliance Master." 100 miles away, under the night sky, an old man leaned against a tree trunk. He took out a small porcelain bottle, took out a pill, and threw it into his mouth. "Bah, it's so bitter." After a moment, he mumbled to himself and took out a cloth bag from his bosom. He carefully took out a milky white square object that was about the size of a fingernail and threw it into his mouth. He mumbled, "That damn Taoist nun, she sure runs fast." Chapter 651. The Taoist nun and the young man surnamed Fong went into the hall to discuss something with the king of Shu. Several people in blue stood behind Li Yi. They seemed to be protecting him, but they were actually watching over him. Li Yi looked back in a certain direction. The king of Shu had actually hooked up with the people of the cult. The old emperor was not dead yet. Did this guy really want to rebel? Li Yi did not know the purpose of this holy religion for the time being. But historical experience told him that it would be a pity if a civil organization gathered more than 100,000 people did not rebel. Along the way, he got a lot of information from the words of these followers. The headquarters of this saint sect was in the kingdom of Qi, and the 100,000 followers were also in the kingdom of Qi. According to the situation they encountered along the way, they had obviously developed to a certain extent in the Jing kingdom. It was just that they didn't know if there were any traces of them in other countries. If there were, this organization was too big. If these people wanted to rebel, the old emperor would probably have a headache. "Brother, you look unfamiliar. You are not from Shuzhou, are you?" A voice came from the side. Li Yi turned his head and saw a young man holding a wine glass and walking towards him. Li Yi felt that he was a little familiar. He must have seen him before, but he should not have talked to him much. Because except for a little familiar, he really could not find anything more about him in his memory. Li Yi nodded and said, "No, I am from the capital city. I am Zhang Zian, the former county lieutenant of Yong County." The young man smiled and sat down beside him. Zhang Zian? Li Yi finally found more information through this name. Prince Ning's mansion, Zhang Zian, Cui Yanxin, who had made things difficult for Wan Ruoqing in Prince Ning's mansion. Later, there was a big storm. The main culprits were this man and Cui Yanxin. Later, he heard that they were implicated because of this. Among the Jinshi candidates of the same year, only these two were temporarily suppressed. After that, he met Cui Yanxin in the king's mansion of Shu. He did not expect to meet another old friend in this desolate Shuzhou. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Master Zhang. I am Li Xian. Brother Li is too polite. Just call me Zian." Zhang Zian smiled and said, "However, Brother Li's name is exactly the same as that of a friend of mine." Li Yi looked at him with a smile and asked, "Brother Zhang, are you talking about the heir of King Ning, Li Xian?" Zhang Zian was stunned for a moment, then he smiled and said, "I forgot that Brother Li is from the capital city. You must have heard of young Prince Li Xian's name." Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Young Prince Li Xian is one of the 3 heroes of the capital city. I didn't expect Brother Zhang to be familiar with him. My apologies." "You're flattering me." Zhang Zian waved his hand and smiled nonchalantly. He said, "This is nothing. Li Yi, the Earl of Chang'an County, and I'm also close friends." "I didn't tell Brother Li, did I?" "Brother Zhang and that Li Yi are close friends?" Li Yi looked surprised. He lowered his voice and said, "I heard that the king of Shu and that Li Yi have a deep feud. Brother Zhang, you..." Zhang Zian was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and said, "I'm just joking. Brother Li, don't take it seriously. I am not that close to that Li Yi." "Brother Li, don't spread rumors." Zhang Zian changed the topic and asked, "Brother Li, are you familiar with that Brother Feng? What is his background?" "Not really." Li Yi shook his head and said, "In fact, today is the first time I've seen him." Zhang Zian looked a little disappointed. The king of Shu's attitude towards that Brother Feng was very unusual. If he could make friends with him, he might have a way out in the future. He had originally wanted to find out something from this place, but this goal had failed. "Brother Zhang is the county lieutenant of Yong County?" Li Yi suddenly looked at him and asked. Since he had nothing to do, it was good to listen to Brother Zhang brag and kill time. Zhang Zian nodded with flagging interest. When he was about to leave after a few words, he suddenly heard the young man opposite him say, "To tell you the truth, I was also a county lieutenant for a period of time." "Huh?" Zhang Zian was stunned and asked, "Brother Li was also a county lieutenant?" "Yes," Li Yi sighed and said, "The past is unbearable. Let's not talk about it, let's not talk about it." At a certain moment, the way Zhang Zian looked at him immediately changed. He let out a long sigh and said, "We are all in the same boat. I didn't expect that Brother Li and I would have the same experience." He drank the wine in his cup, sighed again, and said, "People like us have studied hard for more than 10 years in order to enter the official career. But fate makes fools of us. I, Zhang Zian, have ambitions, but I can only hide in a place like this and become a small county officer." The king of Shu smiled and said, "Don't worry. From now on, you can do whatever you want in Shuzhou. But don't forget what you promised I." "Of course." The man surnamed Fang walked out of the main hall and turned back to salute the king of Shu. He said, "Your Highness, you don't have to send me off." After saying this, he turned and left with the Taoist nun. Seeing the two of them walk away, a man behind the king of Shu said, "Your Highness, are we really going to cooperate with them? I'm afraid that this person has wild ambitions and will be a big trouble." The king of Shu waved his hand and said in a low voice, "When I ascend to the throne, I won't be afraid of his little ambitions. Don't worry. The day I ascend to the throne will be the day they are destroyed." The middle-aged Taoist nun who was walking in front stopped and turned her head. The king of Shu saw her from afar and laughed loudly. "Take care, Taoist." Zhang Zian's eyes were hazy from the alcohol. He patted the table and said, "In the future, if Brother Li has any trouble in Yong County, you can come to the county government to find me." Li Yi smiled and cupped his hands. "Thank you, Lord Zhang." Jiang Ziyan waved his hand and said with dissatisfaction, "There's no need to be polite between us. Just call me Ziyan." Seeing the Taoist nun coming from afar, Li Yi said, "I'm afraid I have to go. Brother Jiang, let's meet again if fate allows it. Remember to come to the county government to find me." Jiang Ziyan lay on the table and murmured. Then he fell into a deep sleep. Seeing Jiang Ziyan's appearance, the man surnamed Fang asked in surprise, "Do you know each other before?" "We just met." Maybe it was the common experience that triggered some kind of emotion in Brother Jiang's heart. After a few words, Brother Jiang treated him as a bosom friend and confided in him. Brother Jiang wished they had known each other for 20 years and almost became sworn brothers on the spot. Of course, it could be just because of his personal charm. After all, although the mask covered his face, it could not cover his temperament. If the mask was taken off, the effect would be better. Our power in the Jing Kingdom is still very weak. Although there are many believers in the capital, they are now being watched by the government and dare not act rashly. In a place like Xuzhou, the government is not very active, which is more suitable for the development of the holy religion. Now that we have reached an agreement with the king of Shu, he will not stop us and will even provide us with convenience. However, at present, we are still a little short of silver, and the king of Shu is not willing to provide us with it. He did not know if the young man did not treat him as an outsider, or if what he said at the moment was not considered confidential. Li Yi was slightly surprised. This guy, the king of Shu, was really messing around with these people. It would be best if we can let him become a believer of our holy religion. The king of Shu is the eldest son of the emperor of the Jing Kingdom. He is most likely to live in the East Palace. In the future, when he inherits the throne and ascends to the throne. When the young man was talking about these things with some excitement, a voice suddenly came from behind. "The king of Shu is most likely to inherit the throne?" Li Yi looked at the young man in surprise and asked, "Don't you usually pay attention to court affairs?" The young man was stunned. He turned around and looked at Li Yi with a frown. He asked, "What do you mean? Have you ever thought about why the king of Shu was banished to Xuzhou when he was doing well in the capital?" Chapter 652. Is what you said true? Li Yi glanced at him and saw that the youth surnamed Fang was looking at him suspiciously. Li Yi shook his head slightly. This young man's question was not up to standard. No one knew the cause and effect of these incidents better than him. He knew what others knew, and he knew the details that others did not. No one knew better than him how the once lofty king of Shu had fallen step by step to the state he was in today. Of course, it was all his own doing. As an outsider, he could not bear to watch a good hand of cards being played to such a state. Now that things had come to this, the king of Shu was destined not to be the emperor. If he left Shu for the capital now, he would die halfway through the journey. This was already decided when he left the capital. If he really colluded with the Taoist nuns faction, there would be more trouble when the time came. Therefore, it was necessary to persuade these people to change their ways. It was not easy for such a large sect to start from scratch. It would be a pity if the king of Shu, who had cheated his teammates for 20 years, were to destroy the foundation that they had built up over the past few decades. Even Li Yi himself could not bear to do so. "Thank you for your reminder, brother. I will investigate carefully." The youth surnamed Fang cupped his hands and said, "We are all on the same side. It is what I should do." Li Yi waved his hand and walked into the inn. He instructed the waiter downstairs, "Send some food and wine up later." Just now in the king of Shu's mansion, he had only heard Brother Jiang boast and sigh, spittle flying everywhere and ruined a table of food. Now he was a little hungry. The waiter hurriedly replied, "All right, sir, please go up first. I will go to the kitchen and inform them. The food and wine will be here soon." Not long after Li Yi stepped into the room, in another guest room, the youth surnamed Fang said with a gloomy face, "Get the person in charge of gathering information in the capital to come here." Not long after, a blue-robed man hurried in and said, "Protector, what instructions do you have?" The youth surnamed Fang looked at him and asked, "Have there been any major changes in the capital's court these past few months?" The man in blue thought for a moment and said, "There are no major changes. It's just that a few days ago, the emperor of the Jing Kingdom sent people to investigate the accounts of the officials in the capital. Later, many officials were dismissed. Recently, after we left the capital, there was quite a bit of turmoil in the court. Every day, there is new information. I haven't had time to sort it out. The youth surnamed Fong said in a deep voice, "Bring me all the information you've gathered." "Yes, Guardian." After a while, the man in blue took a thick book and walked into the room again. The youth surnamed Fong sat down in front of the table and quickly flipped through the pages. As time passed, his expression became increasingly ugly. The king of Shu incited public opinion and attempted to force the abdication of the throne. He was expelled from the capital, the Divination Academy, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Revenue, the Purge of the Imperial Court. The son of the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works has been killed. The Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works will have his property confiscated. The women will be given lowly status, and the men will be exiled for 3,000 li. Useless. The youth surnamed Fong slammed the table fiercely and stood up from his chair. The man in blue hurriedly knelt on the ground and said loudly, "I did not do my job well. Please punish me, Guardian." The youth surnamed Fong did not look at him and muttered, "If the holy religion wastes its resources on this kind of useless person, I'm afraid it will be like drawing water with a wicker basket." Before this, he had always thought that the king of Shu was the only candidate to inherit the throne. After hearing the man's words and carefully understanding the current situation, he finally understood that the situation in the imperial court of the Jing kingdom had changed so much. Although he had a deep hatred for the current Emperor Jing, he would not think that he was a fatuous ruler without talent and virtue. He would not be so fatuous that he would banish the crown prince thousands of miles away when he was seriously ill and carry out a purge in the court to reduce the power behind him. The only explanation was that the king of Shu no longer had a chance to become the emperor. Although useless people are useless, they still have some use. A cold smile appeared on the youth surnamed Fong's face and he said, "Pass down the order. Come on, send these dishes to the guest in room 7 upstairs." The waiter brought out a tray and put it on the table. After giving the order, he went back to the kitchen to busy himself. "I'll do it." A waiter was about to run over when a handsome manservant came out of the kitchen. He carried the dishes with both hands and walked upstairs. In the room, Li Yi sat at the table and poured a cup of tea. He sipped it and was lost in thought as he looked at the flickering candlelight. That damned Taoist nun was really a headache. In the past, when he was with Rui all day long, he did not feel that a grandmaster was very powerful. Previously, he did not feel that Taoist nun was very dangerous. Now he finally understood why all the people in the martial arts world changed their expressions when talking about a grandmaster. Every time he woke up, he felt that this Taoist nun was even more unfathomable. This kind of feeling really made him feel helpless. He held the teacup with a little force. With a crack, the teacup broke. Finally, when he opened his hand, there was only a pile of white powder left in his palm. There was a knock on the door. It should be his supper. With his back to the door, Li Yi was too lazy to look back. He said casually, "The door is not closed. Come in." Then there was the creaking sound of the door opening. "Just put it here." Li Yi pointed to the table casually, clapped his hands and said, "Remember to close the door when you go out." The manservant put the dishes on the table and turned to leave. Soon, Li Yi heard the sound of the door closing. Shuzhou was really a remote place. The chef in the inn's kitchen was obviously not good at cooking. The dishes were black and had no appetite. Li Yi did not even recognize what the dishes were. He took a small bite with a tentative mind, and his brows furrowed tightly. He took another bite and sighed. "This cooking skill is probably on par with that of Mississippi Lu." After saying this, his body inexplicably shivered and his hair stood on end. He slowly turned his head and saw a figure standing behind him. At this time, the figure was looking at him coldly with his arms crossed. Li Yi's eyes widened and he blurted out, "Ru!" He was only able to say one word before his mouth was blocked by the figure. Separated by a wall, the middle-aged Taoist nun sitting cross-legged on the bed slowly opened her eyes. "Ru! Gua, I can give up the whole world, but at least I have you, who is worth cherishing. And you are here, the miracle of life." There was a strange song coming from the other side. It was not the music that was popular in the Qi kingdom or the Jing kingdom. It inevitably sounded a little different, but if one listened carefully, it was still pleasing to the ear. In addition, there were other voices coming. "Young man, don't go back. Sit down and have a drink with me. Let me tell you, You'd better fire the chef in the back kitchen of the inn as soon as possible. It will affect the business. If you don't believe me, you can try it yourself. The middle-aged Taoist nun shook her head. That Li Yi had always given her the feeling that he was different. He always did things that ordinary people could not understand. Until now, she had become much more used to it. If she thought about it carefully, those who were capable were mostly like this. They had some strange habits or behaviors, so she had always turned a blind eye to these things. There were still many things that she needed him in the future. Even if she could not make him loyal, she could not cause too much disgust. The middle-aged Taoist nun turned her head and looked at him, then slowly closed her eyes. Chapter 653. Hey brother, why don't you speak? Are you mute? Li Yi said. He dipped his index finger in the tea and wrote a line on the table. The Taoist nun is next door. Are you alone? Mississippi Lu nodded and then pointed to his face. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and his eyes widened again. Are you really alone? He mouthed. Mississippi Lu nodded and pointed to his face again. Rui. Li Yi had just written 2 words on the table when Mississippi Lu nodded slightly and pointed to his face again. The important thing now was not his face, but how they could escape. Li Yi waved his hand, reached to his ear, touched the edge of the mask and tore it off. Hiss! He almost cried out in pain. He covered his burning face with both hands, and tears were about to flow out of his eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were mute. With tears in his eyes, Li Yi choked with sobs and said apologetically, I'm sorry, I used to have a friend who suffered from aphasia, but he is no longer here. I'm sad and lost my composure. I'm sorry. Wait here. I'll find a way. Second Miss Lu wrote a line of words on the table with tea. She took a deep look at him, turned around, and left. Li Yi stood up and said, Brother, hey brother, don't go. I didn't mean it. I didn't mean to say you were mute. Watching Mississippi Lu walk out, Li Yi closed the door and sat back at the table. Mississippi Lu actually caught up with him. This was probably the best thing that had happened in recent days. Although the two of them together were no match for the Taoist nun, they inexplicably felt much more at ease in their hearts. Of course, if second great uncle wasn't worried about his old arms and legs and could come along, he wouldn't be here right now. Instead, he would be in the room next door, making that Taoist nun kneel down and say that she conquered him. Every time he woke up, he would silently express his admiration for second great uncle in his heart. Using cheats wasn't scary. What was scary was using cheats for a lifetime. He looked at the pile of powder on the table and couldn't imagine what kind of realm second granduncle had reached. Having an old man at home was like having a treasure. Calculating it, the old man could still sleep for a few decades. The current him was already terrifying enough. After a few more decades, would he really be able to break through the void with his sleep? Li Yi picked up his chopsticks. At this time, he no longer felt that the dishes on the table were unpalatable. Soon, he ate them all. Not long after he put down his chopsticks, there was a knock on the door. Little brother, are you here to collect the plates? Li Yi quickly walked over and opened the door. When he saw Taoist nun standing outside, he walked straight into the room. The middle-aged Taoist nun sat on a chair in the room and asked, Has your hypersomnia not recurred in the past 2 days? Li Yi closed the door and walked over. He said, It's easy to get sleepy after sitting in the carriage for a long time. I'm much better these days. I've long heard that you have a grudge against the king of Shu. Li Yi waved his hands repeatedly. It's just a small matter. You're right about one thing. The treatment that the king of Shu has received is indeed not what a crown prince should have. The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at him and said, But don't forget that he is the eldest son. No matter how mediocre he is, he has the Cui family behind him. There are so many big families and so many courtiers. It's reasonable for him to be the emperor. You also know that Emperor Jing doesn't have much time left. This time, the king of Shu has only touched the bottom line of an emperor. Once Emperor Jing's illness worsens, the king of Shu is bound to be summoned back to the capital city. Have you ever thought about how you and the Li family should behave at that time? Of course, Li Yi had thought about this matter. Because he knew that he and the king of Shu were like fire and water, he had long left a way out for the Li family. That was why he had done so much for the eldest princess for free. That was why he had sent the king of Shu out of the capital city. That was why he had caused the king of Shu's faction to be greatly weakened. That was why the king of Shu could only stay in Shuzhou for the rest of his life. Once he left Shuzhou, he would face the pursuit of countless killers. With the title of the king of killers, killing a person in 10 steps and unstoppable in 1,000 miles, and the temptation of 10,000 taels of silver, there would always be a lot of people who couldn't resist such a generous treatment. If 10,000 taels of silver was not enough, then 20,000 taels of silver. Whether it was fame or profit, he would definitely satisfy those people. The Taoist nun said again, "You should know that the day the king of Shu ascends the throne will be the day the Li family is destroyed. Although the Jing kingdom is big, there is no place for you." That's right. Li Yi nodded. In principle, what the Taoist nun said was not wrong at all. Even if you hide in other countries, I don't think you will have a good life. The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at Li Yi and said, "As long as you join the holy religion, I can definitely guarantee the safety of you and the Li family. At that time, you can follow the holy religion to overthrow the Li family's imperial power. Then you will be above tens of thousands of people. I have asked you to consider this a long time ago. What do you think now?" Li Yi sighed and said, "I am not talented and incompetent. I really don't know what I can do for you, Taoist nun." "You don't have to be modest." The middle-aged Taoist nun shook her head and said, "Among the younger generation of the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom, the only one who can compare with you is the third prince of the Qi kingdom. You are different from him. In the whole world, you are the only one who can catch my eye." These words made Li Yi blush a little. Although this Taoist nun was a little bad, her words were rarely to the point. She was also born with a pair of sharp eyes and had once saved him. If it wasn't for the fact that she took advantage of Rui's pregnancy and kidnapped him, he might have had a good impression of her. Unfortunately, he was not interested in rebelling against the old emperor. Moreover, the holy religion was a good thing. This Taoist nun was obviously not a good leader. Even the most basic intelligence system was a mess. It was really unbearable. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "What do you want me to do, Taoist nun?" The middle-aged Taoist nun said, "Liuli Tianfa. As long as you do your best for the holy religion, I will definitely not mistreat you." Liuli didn't care. This thing would not be valuable for long. It was estimated that there was already a trend of a blowout. Not long after, not only the Jing kingdom, but also the Qi kingdom, the Zhao kingdom and the Wu kingdom would not be spared. He had already made arrangements for these things before he left. Tianfa naturally couldn't be given to him. If this thing were to be spread out and obtained by the Qi kingdom, the Jing kingdom would probably be doomed. It would be hard for them to live in the future. A conflicted expression appeared on Li Yi's face. This Taoist nun was too powerful. Moreover, he was still in her hands. At present, there was no good way to get the holy religion into his hands. It was not so easy to change the mind of a fanatic. Tianfa definitely couldn't be given to him. "Are you worried that I will burn the bridge after crossing the river?" The middle-aged Taoist nun saw his hesitation. She threw a token on the table and said, "Take this token, and you will be the protector of the holy religion. Your status will only be below mine. I will give you another half a month to think about it." After saying this, the middle-aged Taoist nun glanced at him and directly turned to leave. Li Yi took out the token and held it in his hand to have a look. It was actually a jade token. It was heavy and felt very good. According to the man in blue, the holy religion had more than 100,000 believers in the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom. Didn't it mean that with this token, he would be below one person and above tens of thousands of people? It was only below one person and above tens of thousands of people. If this Taoist nun accidentally walked on the road and was hit by a meteorite or choked to death while eating or drinking, wouldn't he be the new hierarch? No, they believed in the empress. What should he be called? The Heavenly Duke? No, that was too unpleasant to hear. How about calling it the Ming cult? If it was called the Ming cult, he would be the hierarch. Moreover, the name Ming cult was good for publicity. The Sun Moon cult is accomplished in both literature and martial arts. It will benefit the common people for thousands of generations and unify the martial world. The sacred fire of light shakes the earth and burns away all injustice in the world. The hierarch will enjoy immortal fortune forever and live as long as the heavens. Listen, this was a professional slogan. Just a few people shouting at the top of their lungs that the Divine Empress had appeared and that the Divine Empress was protecting them. The pretentiousness was immediately lowered. If they wanted to gain believers, shouldn't they first shout the slogan a little louder? Under the same conditions, if this stall was left to him to manage, it was possible that his believers would already be spread all over the world. With a single call, he would be able to rebel against the old emperor with a wave of his hand. He would be able to blackmail him all day long and find things for him to do. With this thought, Li Yi's gaze once again turned to the jade token in his hand. The protector of the cult was full of sincerity. Chapter 654. The Ru Family Inn was the largest inn in Yong County. It was also the most famous inn in the entire Shu Prefecture. Although the inn had only been built for less than a year, because of its comfortable environment, attentive service, and friendly price, its reputation had long spread. Regardless of whether it was a passerby or a passing merchant, they were all willing to stay here. Single rooms, standard rooms, husband and wife rooms, family rooms, luxurious rooms, chess rooms, and a series of rooms were available to meet the needs of all kinds of guests. Although it was located in the desolate Shu Prefecture, the business of the Ru Family Inn had always been booming. Since they moved here, in just a few months, 3 inns in Yong County had closed. Even the shops had been bought by the Ru Family Inn. It should be time to open a branch. Just like the name of the inn, it was like home. It gave its guests the feeling of being at home. Step by step, the Ru Family Inn had clearly achieved this. At this time, it was only early in the morning, but there were already many people busy at the entrance of the inn. Erlang, move quickly. We need to set up the platform before noon. A bare-chested man was moving things out of the hostel next to the inn. He turned around and urged another skinny figure. The young man laughed and said, "Big brother, don't worry. We can make it." Someone behind him teased, "Old Zhu, why are you moving so little at once? Are you tired from having fun with the brothel girls yesterday? Let me give you a piece of advice. It's fine to go to brothels every now and then. How can you go there 3 times a day?" This man's name was Zhu Dong. He had a younger brother at home. Everyone usually called him Zhu Dalong. The 2 brothers were originally butchers and later worked in the brothel. After interacting with each other for a while, they were already familiar with each other. Zhu Dalong waved his hand and scolded, "Get out of here. I don't need you to care about my business. Hurry up. If you're late and make the manager unhappy, you'll lose this month's bonus. You're just afraid that you won't have a bonus." A burst of laughter came from behind him. Inside the inn, a waiter walked out and asked, "Hey, old Zhu, you're here again today? You guys are making so much noise outside. Aren't you disturbing our business?" Bah! Zhu Dalong cast a sidelong glance at him and said, "Disturbing your business? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog? Without us, would your business be so good?" The waiter smiled sheepishly and hurried over to help him unload the things on his shoulders and put them on the empty space beside him. The brothel business was booming. When it was mealtime, some people were too lazy to go back, so they just ate in the inn. It was also a great boost to their business. To a certain extent, the reason why the Ru Family Inn was so popular was because there was a brothel next to it. When the guests were free, they only needed to take a few steps downstairs to find a place to spend their time. Of course, although one of them worked in an inn and the other worked in a brothel, they were still a family. Back then, it had been a tough journey, so they didn't care about these small matters. "Hey, that brothel is going to have a benefit performance again today. It's rare. I've missed it the last few times. I'll come over to reserve a seat after I finish my meal. I don't know what to sing today. I like Legend of the White Snake. I like Hua Mulan. Mu Guing is fine too." The passers-by stood in the distance and whispered to each other. There were also people coming out of the surrounding shops to take a look. The show at the brothel was really good. Every once in a while, they would bring out the stage to perform for free. It would be a waste not to watch it. They had to reserve a seat now, or they would have to stand in a while. Li Yi stretched his body. Recently, he hadn't been eating or sleeping well. It had been a long time since he had such a comfortable sleep. He opened the door and saw a waiter walking up with a tray. Li Yi's face lit up. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Hey brother, it's you again. I'm really sorry about last night. Come, put the things in." 15 minutes later, the waiter walked out of the room. Downstairs, the man with the surname Fong walked out of the room. Immediately, a man in blue came up to him and said, "Envoy, everything is ready. When do we start?" "Tonight at midnight." The man with the surname Fong said in a low voice and walked upstairs. The waiter brushed past him. The man with the surname Fong suddenly stopped and said, "Stop." He turned his head and looked at the waiter and asked, "Are you a waiter here? Why didn't I see you a few days ago?" The handsome waiter looked at him indifferently. There was no change in his expression. "Raise your head." The man with the surname Fong had a look of doubt on his face. He extended his hand to hold the waiter's chin. His other hand reached out from the side and grabbed the waiter's wrist. Li Yi looked at him with a smile and said, "Brother Fong, this brother can't speak." The waiter glanced at Li Yi and turned to go downstairs. "Stop." A hint of anger appeared on the man with the surname Fong's face. Just as he was about to chase after him, the hand firmly grabbed his wrist. He couldn't break free no matter how hard he tried. His expression changed slightly. When he turned his head to look at Li Yi, a strange expression finally appeared on his face. Li Yi loosened his grip. The man with the surname Fong looked at him and said, "I've underestimated you before." After saying that, a hand suddenly reached out and went straight for Li Yi's throat. Bang! After a dull sound, Li Yi took 2 steps back. The young man's body swayed on the spot and an unnatural red flush appeared on his face. Li Yi waved his hand. This guy was indeed powerful. Back at the Heroes Conference, he was able to fight Yang Luqing to a standstill. He was not someone that Li Yi could defeat just by sleeping a few times. Pa! As he waved his sleeve, something flew out from his sleeve and landed on the floor, making a clear sound. The man with the surname Fong instinctively lowered his head to take a look. After being stunned for a moment, his expression changed greatly the next moment. "Blue Dragon Envoy." He suddenly raised his head to look at Li Yi and said angrily, "How is this possible?" Thump. The 2 men in blue behind him immediately knelt on the ground and said loudly, "Your subordinates greet the left guardian." The man with the surname Fong took a step forward and picked up the token on the ground. He flipped it over and looked at it. The azure dragon pattern carved on it was vivid and lifelike. He took out another token from his waist. It looked almost exactly the same as this one, but what was carved on it was a white tiger. Azure dragon on the left and white tiger on the right. The azure dragon was the leader, and the white tiger was the support. The left guardian of the holy religion. The left protector whose status was only below that of the empress. He narrowed his eyes, looked at Li Yi and said coldly, "Where did you get this token? Tell me the truth." Li Yi calmly glanced at him and did not say anything. A trace of anger appeared on the young man's face. He turned to the 2 men in blue behind him and said, "You too capture him. I'll go ask her ladyship." The 2 men in blue lowered their heads and remained unmoved. The young man with the surname Fong's expression changed. He looked at Li Yi with an even more vicious gaze. However, he did not say anything else. Instead, he walked straight to a door in front of him. After knocking on the door, he pushed it open and walked in. The young man angrily looked at the middle-aged Taoist nun who was sitting cross-legged on the bed and asked, "Auntie, I want an explanation. Why is he the left guardian? Who is he?" Chapter 655. Li Yi stared in astonishment at the man in blue, who was kneeling on the ground with a pious expression. The man in blue could be considered as a small executive within the Holy Church, but he actually behaved like a fanatic. He didn't even let the higher-ups off. This brainwashing job was very successful. "I understand." Not long after, the young man slowly retreated from the room. He stood at the door and spoke respectfully. When he turned around, he threw the sign back to Li Yi. He glared fiercely at him again, then flicked his sleeves and left. Li Yi held the sign in his hand and looked at it as he walked downstairs. That fellow just now seemed to have taken out a similar sign. On the way here, he had heard from the man in blue that besides the Empress, the Holy Church also had the left and right protectors, 8 purple-robed envoys, and more blue-robed envoys. There were even more yellow-robed envoys, and then there were 100,000 followers. However, all the believers had only seen the right emissary. As for the mysterious left emissary, whose position was second only to the Empress, He had never seen him before. Based on the situation just now, his sign seemed to be worth a bit more than the sign of the young man surnamed Feng. Azure Dragon Envoy. Li Yi thought for a moment. The Azure Dragon on the left and the White Tiger on the right. If he was the Azure Dragon Envoy, then wouldn't the man surnamed Feng be the White? Oh, so shameful. That man surnamed Feng was really shameless. We pay our respects to the left protector. Seeing the sign in Li Yi's hand, the dozen or so people around him all knelt down on the ground. The diners downstairs looked at this scene in astonishment. Their chopsticks fell to the ground. At the door, the young man surnamed Feng stopped in his tracks. He clenched his teeth and punched the wall. Then he strode out of the inn. In the hall, a steward said to a servant loudly, "Be careful on the road. Remember to buy live fish, fresh ones." The handsome servant nodded slightly. He raised his head and glanced at the steward, then slowly walked out of the inn. Big Brother Lu's words are too biased. Who said that women enjoy leisure? Men fight at the borders while women weave at home. Afternoon, a loud and clear voice came from a wide plaza next to the Ru family inn. The Ru family inn and this brothel had both been moved here a few months ago. The so-called brothel was nothing more than a place to sing operas and listen to books. The stories were old-fashioned, and the plots were boring. Usually, when people were free, they rarely went to the brothel to watch operas and listen to music. However, this brothel subverted their understanding of brothels. There were novel stories, interesting scripts, and exquisite performances. Most importantly, the price was low. You could watch it for an hour with just 1 copper coin. Every few days, they would set up a stage outside to perform for the passers-by to watch for free. Therefore, although the brothel had only been here for a short period of time, it had accumulated enough popularity. At this moment, the woman on the stage was singing a new play, Hua Mulan. It was a story about a heroine who joined the army on behalf of her father. It was said that the current Princess Royal was also a heroine who was not inferior to any man. She fought bravely against the people of the Qi Kingdom and helped the Jing Kingdom regain its dignity. The people of Shu Land had long heard of this story. Do you think that Hua Mulan, a woman, can lead an army to war? Who says she can't? Can't women fight? Doesn't your wife beat you up all day? What I mean is, as a woman, won't she be discovered in a place where men eat and sleep? Idiot, if you want to sleep with her every night, what would you say? The passers-by chatted as they watched the show. From time to time, people from the inn would come out and join the crowd. As for those who were self-conscious and did not want to be crowded with ordinary people, they could watch the show through a stage on the second floor of the Ru family inn for just 1 silver coin. The view was clearer and the view was better. If they added another silver coin, they could enjoy the super VIP seats in the front row. They would also be provided with free sunflower seeds, mineral water, and melon seeds at no extra cost. Every free performance at the brothel would last from noon to night. Yong County did not have a curfew, so everyone could watch the show. Gradually, a few people in yellow walked out of the inn. They stood outside the crowd and watched with interest. A man carried a pole and walked over from afar. He shouted, "Herbal tea! Herbal tea! 2 copper coins for your fill." Every time there was a benefit performance at the brothel, there would be hawkers who wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to sell tea and fruits. Their business was much better than usual. It was already early April. From April onwards, summer would begin in Shu Prefecture. Immediately, someone walked out from the crowd and said, "Give me a cup of tea." "All right." The man laughed and immediately scooped up a cup of tea for the man. The man picked it up and drank it in 1 gulp. He smiled and said, "Delicious. Give me another cup. I've never had such a taste before." "Hee, a family recipe." The man laughed and scooped up another cup. At the edge of the crowd, a few people in yellow turned back and looked. They licked their lips and looked at the stage again. The youth with the surname Fong walked in front with a gloomy expression. 2 people in blue and several people in yellow followed behind him. A man in blue stepped forward and said, "Guardian, everyone is ready. We are only waiting for your order." "There's no need to wait for me. Once it's midnight, we will act immediately," the youth with the surname Fong said and suddenly stopped. He tilted his head and glanced at them before continuing to walk forward. The people behind him parted ways. The youth with the surname Fong changed his direction and walked towards a deserted alley. Yong County was desolate and not very prosperous. The further the youth with the surname Fong walked, the more remote it became. After about 15 minutes, he reached a dead end. The youth with the surname Fong walked into the alley. Then, he turned around and crossed his arms. He said coldly, "Aren't you tired after following me for so long?" As his voice fell, a figure slowly walked out from behind. The moment he saw the figure, the youth with the surname Fong was startled. He blurted out, "It's you?" Then, a cold smile appeared on his face. He said, "I knew there was something wrong with you. I just didn't expect that you would have such guts. You actually dared to follow me alone." The youth with the surname Fong looked at the servant and clapped his hands. A few figures surrounded him from behind. They were the people in blue and yellow. The youth with the surname Fong looked at him and said coldly, "You are in cahoots with that impostor, right?" The handsome manservant didn't answer. His expression was still calm as he slowly walked over. This undisguised disregard caused the expression of the youth with the surname Fong to completely darken. "Take him down." He waved his hand and said coldly, "Take him alive. I want to see what that impostor is plotting." The people in blue and yellow sped up and walked towards the handsome servant. 3 breaths later, the youth with the surname Fong knelt on the ground. A long sword was pressed against his neck. His face was pale and he asked in a trembling voice, "Who are you? What do you want?" You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.